The great hall smelled wrong, not the warm, comforting smell it was supposed to have. Roast potatoes, polished oak, candle wax, parchment, and the faint sweetness of pumpkin juice. This was smoke that bit the throat and clung to the tongue. This was iron in the air, sharp and undeniable, mixing with ash that drifted down in slow grey flakes. Broken benches lay scattered like bones. Goblets had toppled and shattered, their spilled contents darkening the stone. The enchanted ceiling flickered between storm black and firelight, as if the castle itself couldn't decide what it was allowed to show. Dudley Dursley stood in the ruins like he didn't belong in the story he'd stumbled into. His wand, still a concept that sometimes didn't feel real, was cracked along the grain. A thin fracture ran from the handle toward the tip, as if the wood had taken a wound and refused to heal. His knuckles were split open, blood drying in the lines of his fingers. His Hufflepuff robes hung in shreds, yellow fabric stained with soot, and something darker. At his feet lay Harry Potter, not moving, not breathing. For a moment, Dudley did not understand what he was looking at. His mind rejected it the way it rejected anything too large to hold. It didn't fit with Harry. It didn't fit with the way Harry always got up, the way Harry always kept going, the way Harry survived things that should have crushed him. Dudley's thoughts tried to slide around the truth, searching for another explanation the way they used to search for excuses. But the stillness didn't bend. Dudley dropped to his knees, so hard pain sparked up his legs. He grabbed Harry by the collar and shook him once, then again, as if force could drag him back from wherever he'd gone. "Get up," Dudley said. His voice broke on the words. They came out smaller than he meant them to, thin with panic. "You don't get to leave me now." He pressed his forehead against Harry's shoulder, breathing too fast, the world narrowing to this single point of horror. The sounds of battle, distant shouting, collapsing stone, the crack of spells, faded until Dudley could hear only his own heartbeat and the quiet, impossible absence of Harry's breath. Dudley's hands trembled. He had hit people before. He had hurt people before. He had been cruel with a confidence he hadn't earned because he had been raised on praise and permission. But he had never felt fear like this. Not fear of punishment, not fear of embarrassment, not fear of losing. This was fear that reached inside him and grabbed something vital. Fear that said, if Harry is gone, something in Dudley goes with him. His throat tightened until he couldn't swallow. "Please," he whispered, though he didn't know who he was speaking to. Harry, the castle, the universe itself. "Please." He looked up through stinging eyes and saw the great hall as it truly was. Not a symbol, not a legend, a place where children had learned, laughed, eaten, complained about homework, rolled their eyes at teachers, fallen asleep over books, fallen in love, broken hearts, forgiven each other, sworn loyalty, and meant it. Now it was a battlefield. Now it was a graveyard in motion. Dudley lowered his gaze back to Harry's face. Soot streaked across Harry's cheek. His glasses were missing. A cut split his lip. His hair, always wild, always stubborn, lay flattened with sweat. Dudley's hands curled into fists. He had not always been this boy. He had not always been Harry's brother. He had been Harry's bully. And that was the part that made this unbearable. The knowledge that there was a version of the world where Dudley never learned, never changed, never earned even the right to kneel here and beg. But this story didn't begin with death. It didn't begin with smoke and blood, and the kind of silence that splits your life into before and after. It began with 2 letters, and the man who tried to burn them both. You already know the first part. Letters flooded, number 4, Privet Drive. Vernon Dursley lost his mind the way he always did, whenever something threatened his carefully built idea of normal. He snatched envelopes from hands, from air, from the floor. He nailed the letterbox shut. He boarded up cracks. He barked orders and threats as if the universe could be intimidated into retreat. But you don't know this part. That morning, there wasn't one letter. There were two. The first was addressed in the same unmistakable green ink. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard, under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive. The second envelope sat beneath it like a punchline no one had bothered to soften. Mr. D. Dursley, second bedroom, 4 Privet Drive. Vernon saw it. He froze so suddenly that Petunia looked up from the kettle, startled by the quiet. The kitchen had been humming with its usual controlled routine. Kettle boiling, toast popping. Petunia's precise movements. Vernon's sudden stillness was like a crack in the house itself. His face went white, first blank and shocked, then purple as anger surged, then into something worse than either. Something frightened and vicious. Dudley watched his father's expression transform and felt, for the first time in his life, that his father was not a shield. His father was a storm. Vernon's eyes snapped from the envelopes to Dudley. Dudley's stomach dipped. He had expected Vernon to shout about Harry. That was the pattern. Harry was the mistake. Harry was the thing that didn't belong. But Vernon's gaze didn't linger on Harry's name this time. It landed on Dudley, as if Dudley were the betrayal. Vernon snatched the second letter up and held it like it was evidence of a crime. Freak. The word struck Dudley like a slap, not because it was unfamiliar. Vernon used that word the way he used the word boy, the way he used abnormal, the way he used anything that made him feel in control. But it had always been aimed at Harry, never Dudley. "You're one of them," Vernon said, voice shaking with outrage. "You're one of them." Dudley blinked. He didn't understand. His mind tripped over the sentence, trying to find the right place to put it. He stared at Vernon's face and saw something he had never seen there before. Not certainty. Not superiority. Panic. "I didn't—" Dudley began. Vernon cut him off with a sharp, ugly sound. "Don't you lie to me." Dudley's mouth closed. He didn't know what to say, because he didn't know what he was being accused of. It felt like being shoved into a game where everyone else already knew the rules, and the first rule was that Dudley was guilty. Harry stood near the doorway, silent and wary, as if he'd learned long ago that drawing attention only made things worse. He held himself like he was braced for impact, shoulders tight, eyes alert. Dudley had never noticed how often Harry held himself like that. Not really, not in a way that mattered. Petunia stood in the kitchen doorway, with one hand on the frame. For years, her face had been a mask, tight, controlled, cold. Dudley had seen her soften for him, of course. Petunia smiled at Dudley. Petunia fussed over Dudley. Petunia defended Dudley the way a person defends their last piece of certainty. But now, something cracked behind her expression. Her gaze was fixed on the second letter. Dudley watched recognition ripple through her like a tremor. She remembered another letter. She remembered being 11 years old and watching her sister's name written in special ink, watching the world open for Lily, while the door stayed locked in Petunia's face. She remembered the jealousy that had tasted like ash, the way it had turned sharp and bitter and permanent. She remembered writing, begging, being told no. She remembered the lifetime of watching Lily shine from the outside, and suddenly she looked at Dudley, not with indulgence, but with something raw and frightened. "Not again," her face seemed to say. "Not my child." Vernon shoved both envelopes toward the fire as if destroying the paper could destroy the truth. Petunia moved. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't calm. It was fast and desperate. She crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, snatched the letters from Vernon's hand, and clutched them to her chest like they were living things. "No," she said, voice rising. "No." Vernon stared at her. as if she'd grown another head. "Petunia, he is my son," Petunia shouted, and the words ripped out of her with a force Dudley had never heard from her before. "He is my son." Dudley went very still. He had never heard her raise her voice like that. Not in real anger, not in real fear, not at Vernon. Her fingers tightened until the paper crumpled slightly. "I won't let you do to him what I did to Lily," she said. And on Lily's name, her voice cracked in a way that made Dudley's skin prickle. Vernon's face twisted. His nostrils flared. His jaw clenched. His hands curled as if he wanted to grab something and break it. Then his ultimatum came, fast and absolute, like the slam of a door. "Then you're all freaks," he spat. "Get out. Get out of my house." The words hung in the air. Dudley stared at him. "His house," Vernon had said. "Not our house. Not the family's house. His." Dudley looked at his mother. Petunia's chest rose and fell too quickly. She held the letters like they were the only thing keeping her upright. Harry didn't move. He watched, expression closed, but something in his eyes shifted, the smallest flicker of disbelief, like he couldn't imagine Petunia doing this for anyone, not even her own son. Dudley's mouth went dry. "What?" he managed. Vernon pointed toward the front door with a shaking hand. "Now." Petunia's lips parted. For a second she looked like she might beg. Then she swallowed it down. She lifted her chin, and Dudley saw something he'd never seen in her before either. Resolve. "Fine," Petunia said, voice unsteady but firm. "Fine." Vernon's eyes widened, as if he hadn't expected her to choose anyone over him. Petunia turned toward Dudley and Harry. "Go upstairs," she said quickly. "Pack what you can carry. Only what you need." Dudley didn't move. His bedroom was upstairs. His second bedroom. His toys. His posters. His video games. His shelves of things he'd been given without ever having to ask. The idea of leaving it all felt like the ground tilting beneath him. Harry moved first. Harry, who owned almost nothing, went up the stairs without hesitation, quiet as a shadow. Dudley followed, legs heavy, mind still trying to catch up. In his room, Dudley stood in the center like someone had stolen the air. He looked around at everything he'd always assumed would be there. The bedspread, the wardrobe, the piles of things, the comfort of knowing his life was set and safe. All of it suddenly felt fragile. He heard Petunia downstairs, moving fast. Cupboards opening, drawers sliding shut. He heard Vernon's voice, loud and furious, though the words blurred. He didn't hear Harry at all. Dudley grabbed a suitcase with shaking hands and began stuffing clothes into it without thinking. Shirts, jumpers, socks. He paused when his hand brushed his favorite toy. For a moment he almost packed it too. Then he stopped. This wasn't a holiday. This was exile. He left the toy behind. He moved to the doorway and saw Harry across the hall, standing in front of the cupboard under the stairs. Harry had opened the door. Dudley had never looked inside for longer than a second. It had been Harry's place, the place you shoved someone when you didn't want to think about them. Now Dudley saw it properly. It was too small, too dark, too cramped. There were scratches on the inside of the door, marks that looked like they'd been made by fingernails or desperate objects. The air smelled stale. Harry pulled out a trunk. A trunk. Dudley blinked hard. The fact that Harry had a trunk at all felt strange, like proof that Harry's life had always existed in a different shape than Dudley's. Harry's movements were careful and quiet. He didn't rummage through toys or choose between shirts. He had so little that packing was simple. Dudley watched him and felt something twist in his chest. Not guilt yet. Not fully. Something closer to confusion, because for the first time, Dudley saw Harry not as background, not as the boy who was there to be shoved and mocked. He saw him as someone who had been living in a cupboard while Dudley slept in a second bedroom. He saw him as someone who had always been ready to leave. Harry lifted the trunk handle, but it caught on something. A small tin slid out and clinked against the floor. Harry froze. His hand went to it automatically, like a reflex, like fear lived in his fingertips. Dudley's gaze locked on the tin. "What's that?" he asked before he could stop himself. Harry's eyes flicked up. Suspicion sharpened his face, a defensive mask Dudley had helped build. "Nothing," Harry said quickly. But it wasn't nothing. It was dented and old, the kind of tin Petunia might have used for sewing supplies. Only this one was scuffed, carried, handled, often. Dudley stepped closer, slow, as if approaching a wild animal. Harry tightened his grip on the tin. "It's mine," Harry said. A warning. Dudley nodded. He didn't know why he was nodding. He didn't know what he was allowed to say. "Right," he muttered. Harry shoved the tin into his trunk and slammed it shut. Silence settled between them. Downstairs, Vernon shouted again. Something smashed, perhaps a plate, perhaps a cup. Petunia's voice rose in response, sharp and trembling. Dudley flinched. Vernon had shouted before. Vernon had thrown things before. But not like this. Not aimed inward. Not at Dudley. Not at Petunia. This wasn't anger about a neighbor seeing something odd. This was fear turned violent. Dudley swallowed. Harry lifted his trunk. Dudley grabbed his suitcase. Together they went down the stairs. Petunia stood in the hall, clutching her own bag. Her hair had come loose, strands sticking to her forehead. Her eyes were red, but her back was straight. Vernon stood by the kitchen, breathing hard, face contorted. "You walk out that door," Vernon said, voice low and shaking, "and you don't come back." Petunia stared at him. For a second, Dudley thought she might crumble, thought she might apologize and beg and try to stitch the family back into its old shape. Instead, Petunia stepped forward, took Dudley's hand in one grip, and reached for Harry's shoulder with the other. Harry flinched at the touch. Petunia hesitated. Then she left her hand there anyway. Awkward, uncertain, but real. Dudley stared at her fingers on Harry's shoulder, like he couldn't quite understand the gesture. "Come on," Petunia whispered. They walked out of number 4, Privet Drive, into a street that looked exactly the same as it always had. Neat hedges, polished cars, tidy lawns, but the world had shifted beneath it. Neighbors peered through curtains. A dog barked somewhere down the road. The sky was pale, indifferent. Petunia held Harry's shoulder as they walked. Harry's entire body stayed tense, as if he expected her hand to turn into a shove at any moment. But it didn't. Dudley looked back once. Vernon stood framed in the doorway watching them go, face hard as stone. Dudley's chest tightened. He had never imagined a world where his father would look at him like that. He had never imagined a world where his mother would choose anyone over his father. He had never imagined a world where Harry might walk beside him as something other than a target. They reached the end of the street. Petunia stopped at the corner, breathing hard, as if she'd run a mile. Dudley stood beside her with his suitcase. Harry stood on the other side, trunk at his feet. 3 people, no plan, no home, and 2 letters that had burned a hole through the life they thought they had. Petunia looked down at Dudley. Her mouth trembled. "Dudley," she said. He waited. "I need you to listen to me," she whispered. "Whatever happens, you are not your father." Dudley didn't know what to do with that. He didn't know how to respond. He just nodded, because nodding was the only thing he could manage. Then Petunia looked at Harry. Her eyes searched his face, as if she was seeing him for the first time and recognizing something she'd been refusing to recognize for 11 years. Harry didn't look away. He didn't soften. He just watched her with that wary, guarded expression. The expression of someone who has learned that kindness is usually a trick. Petunia swallowed. I'm sorry, she said, barely audible. Harry's jaw tightened. Dudley felt the words land like something dropped into deep water. They didn't splash. They sank. A silence stretched between them. Then Petunia straightened, as if apology was not something she knew how to live inside for too long. "We'll go to a hotel," she said quickly, voice brisk with forced practicality. "For now, we'll figure something out." Dudley's stomach clenched. A hotel sounded temporary. Hotels were for holidays, for weekends, for the kind of life that always ended back at your own front door. But their front door was gone. Harry didn't argue. He just nodded. The way you nod when you're used to not having a say. They walked. Petunia's hand stayed on Harry's shoulder for a few more steps, then slid away as if she couldn't bear the unfamiliar contact. Dudley watched Harry's shoulders remain tight, even after the touch disappeared, as if his body didn't trust that it was over. As they moved, Dudley kept glancing at the envelopes tucked under Petunia's arm. His name, his second bedroom, Hogwarts. The word was strange in his mind. It felt like a foreign place he'd accidentally been invited to. A thought rose in him, quiet and sharp. What if I don't belong? He didn't say it out loud. He didn't know yet that Harry was thinking the exact same thing. They reached a bus stop. Petunia stood stiffly, clutching the letters as if they might vanish. Dudley looked at Harry, who stared at the pavement. For years, Dudley had made Harry smaller. Now the world had made Dudley small. He didn't know how to exist without the old rules. He didn't know who he was supposed to be if he wasn't the boy who laughed while Harry suffered. The bus arrived with a hiss. They stepped on. Dudley sat beside the window. Harry sat across the aisle, trunk between his knees. Petunia sat in the middle, as if she couldn't decide which boy she was meant to protect first. As the bus pulled away from Privet Drive, Dudley pressed his forehead to the glass. The street shrank behind them. His house disappeared. And with it, the version of Dudley who had never had to question anything. Dudley didn't notice at first, but Harry was watching him. Not with trust, not with affection, with something more cautious. As if Harry was trying to understand whether Dudley was about to become something else. Dudley's fingers tightened around the handle of his suitcase. He didn't know what he was becoming. He only knew that the world had opened a door he hadn't asked for. And once you step through a door like that, you can't go back. The hotel smelled like carpet cleaner and old cigarettes, even though the sign on the wall promised it was a non-smoking building. Petunia stood at the foot of the bed with her handbag clutched in both hands, staring at the thin curtains as if she could will them into being proper drapes. Dudley sat on the edge of the mattress, knees apart, suitcase at his feet, and felt like he was waiting for someone to explain the rules of a life that had changed without his permission. Harry had chosen the chair in the corner, not because it looked comfortable. It didn't. But because it put his back to the wall and his eyes on the room. Dudley had never paid attention to that sort of thing before. Never noticed the way Harry always positioned himself like he was bracing for something. Now, in this strange, neutral space, with no cupboard door and no shouting from the kitchen, it was impossible to ignore. Petunia placed the two envelopes on the bedside table like they were dangerous objects. Dudley stared at them. His name had never looked so unnatural in neat handwriting. Mr. D. Dursley, second bedroom. The second bedroom didn't exist anymore. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. It was just a room full of things he'd thought were permanent. Petunia cleared her throat. "Tomorrow," she said briskly, voice too controlled, "we go to London. We'll do what the letters say." Dudley looked up, startled. "We're going?" he asked. Petunia's mouth tightened. "Yes." Harry's eyes flicked to her, sharp with disbelief. "You're taking us?" Harry said. The words came out quiet, but Dudley heard what was underneath them. Not curiosity, suspicion. Petunia flinched like she'd been struck. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her gaze dropped to the bedspread. "I have to," she said finally. "I should have." A long time ago, Harry didn't respond. Dudley didn't either. He didn't know what to do with his mother's tone, softened and guilty, like someone had scooped out the hard center of her and left the shell behind. It didn't match the woman who had snapped orders and scolded Harry for breathing too loudly. It didn't match the woman who had turned away every time Harry needed something. It felt like seeing a familiar picture in the wrong colors. That night, Dudley lay awake listening to the hotel's strange noises. Pipes, distant footsteps, a television in the room next door. His mind kept replaying Vernon's face, the word freak thrown like a stone, and Petunia's shout. "He is my son." Dudley's chest tightened each time he remembered it, because it came with an awful realization. If she could say that now, what had stopped her from saying it before? He turned his head and saw Harry in the other bed, facing the wall. For a long time, Dudley watched the rise and fall of Harry's shoulders. Harry didn't sleep like a boy who felt safe. Even unconscious, he held tension in his posture, a readiness to wake. Dudley thought of the cupboard. He thought of all the times he'd laughed because his parents laughed, because cruelty was easy when it was the house's language. He swallowed hard. "I didn't know," he whispered into the dark, though he wasn't sure who he was speaking to. Harry, himself, the world. Harry didn't move. Dudley didn't expect him to. The next morning was grey and damp, the kind of day Privet Drive would have pretended didn't exist. Petunia marched them through King's Cross, as if she could keep fear at bay with briskness. Dudley stayed close, staring at the crowds, and wondering how it was possible that the world could be filled with people who had no idea what was happening to him. Harry walked slightly behind them, quiet, eyes scanning. He didn't look excited. He looked like someone preparing for a test. When they reached the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, Petunia stopped. Her hand tightened on Dudley's sleeve. Harry watched her. Petunia's face went pale. She swallowed. "This is," she began, then shook her head, as if the words wouldn't cooperate. Harry stepped forward. "It's all right," he said, and Dudley heard something in his voice that felt wrong. Harry, who had never been comforted by her. Harry pushed his trolley forward and walked directly at the barrier. Dudley flinched, expecting a crash, expecting the world to punish Harry for daring. But Harry vanished, just gone. Petunia let out a sound that might have been a sob. Dudley stared at the barrier like it was the edge of the universe. Petunia looked at him. "Go," she said, voice shaking. "Just go." Dudley's legs felt numb. He pushed his trolley forward, heart slamming against his ribs. At the last second, he shut his eyes. And then he was through. The air changed. The noise changed. It was like stepping into a hidden room inside reality. A scarlet train waited along the platform, long and gleaming. Steam drifted from its engine. People moved with purpose. Families, children, owls in cages, trunks rolling over the stones. Everywhere Dudley looked, he saw things that didn't belong in the world he knew. A cat wearing a ridiculous little collar, a man with a walking stick that seemed to hum faintly, a woman hugging her child, while sparks leapt from the child's hair like tiny fireworks. Dudley stood frozen. Harry was nearby, hands on his trolley, watching Dudley with an expression that was hard to read. Not kind, not cruel, just waiting. Petunia appeared a moment later, pale and trembling, as if she'd forced herself through something that still hurt even after all these years. She looked at the train with an expression that was half grief, half longing. Dudley glanced at her and understood, suddenly, that this place didn't just mean Dudley might be a wizard. It meant Petunia had once wanted to be one. It meant she had once stood outside a door that opened for Lily and not for her, and she had spent the rest of her life pretending the door didn't exist. Dudley swallowed. Harry broke the silence first. "Come on," he said simply. They climbed aboard. The Hogwarts Express smelled like coal smoke and chocolate and old wood warmed by steam. The corridor was crowded, voices echoing, trunks shoved into compartments, laughter spilling out in bursts. Dudley followed Harry into an empty compartment because it was easier than choosing. They slid the door shut, and suddenly the noise dulled. Harry sat by the window. Dudley sat opposite. The seat felt too small for Dudley's body. His knees bumped the edge of the table. He shifted awkwardly and stared at his hands, at the faint scabs on his knuckles from a fight in primary school, at the familiar shape of his fingers in a world that already felt like it had different shapes. Neither spoke. 11 years of history sat between them like a thick, ugly thing. Every shove, every stolen meal, every time Dudley had laughed while Harry swallowed pain. The silence was heavier than words. Dudley looked out the window, pretending the scenery mattered. His throat felt tight. Then the compartment door slid open. A boy stood there with pale hair so neat it looked combed into place by magic. His posture was casual, confident, like the train belonged to him. Two larger boys flanked him, thick-necked and expressionless, like human guards. Dudley recognized the type immediately. He didn't know the terms yet. Pure blood, mud blood, houses, but he knew the posture. He knew the sneer. He knew the way some boys walked into a room, expecting the world to move aside. The pale boy's eyes locked on Harry. "So," he said, voice smooth, "it's true. Harry Potter's on the train." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His gaze flicked to Dudley, taking in the size of him, the awkwardness, the non-magical clothes. "And who's this?" the boy said, curling his lip. "Your pet whale?" The two boys snickered. Dudley felt heat rise in his face. He didn't even fully understand the insult, but he understood the intention, to make him smaller, to make him laughable. Harry's jaw tightened. The pale boy continued, as if enjoying his own performance. "They're saying you were raised by muggles," he said, eyes narrowing. "Pity. But you'll learn soon enough how things work." He leaned closer, voice lowering as if he was offering a secret. "Some families matter," he said. "Some don't. Stick with me, and I'll show you which is which." Then he extended his hand toward Harry, confident that Harry would take it. Harry stared at the hand. For a heartbeat, Dudley thought Harry might. Not because Harry wanted to, but because Dudley knew what it was like to accept something unpleasant, because the alternative felt worse. But Harry didn't. "I think I can tell the wrong sort for myself," Harry said calmly. "Thanks." The pale boy's face flushed pink. His hand dropped. "You'll regret that," he said sharply. He turned to leave, then paused as if remembering something amusing. "Enjoy your mudblood cousin while you can," he added lightly. Dudley's stomach twisted. He didn't understand the word mudblood. Not properly, but he understood the tone. He understood that it was meant to be dirty. He understood that it was meant to make Harry feel ashamed. He watched Harry's shoulders go tighter, watched the familiar bracing tension return. Something shifted in Dudley's chest. It was not heroic. It was not noble. It was uncomfortable and sharp, like swallowing a stone. Because Dudley had used that tone. Dudley had been that boy. And suddenly, seeing it from the other side made him feel sick. He moved before he thought. His hand shot out, caught the pale boy's collar, yanked him back, and shoved him into the compartment wall hard enough to rattle the window. The boy's breath punched out of him in surprise. Dudley leaned in, towering. "Leave him alone," Dudley growled. The pale boy's eyes went wide. The two boys behind him, Crab and Goyle. Dudley would learn their names later, reached for their wands, but they hesitated. Dudley was bigger than both of them combined. "Let's go," the pale boy snapped, voice suddenly thin. He wrenched himself free, straightened his robes with shaking fingers, and tried to recover his dignity. "You'll pay for that, muggle," he hissed at Dudley, though Dudley wasn't sure whether it was an insult or just a word. Then the three of them left, the door sliding shut behind them with a sharp click. Silence returned. It was different now, not heavy with cruelty. Heavy with shock. Harry stared at Dudley as if Dudley had sprouted horns. "Why did you do that?" Harry asked. Dudley opened his mouth. No answer came. Not a good one. Not one that made him sound like a better person than he was. He shrugged instead, awkward and stiff. "Didn't like how he talked to you," Dudley muttered. Harry didn't look convinced. Dudley didn't blame him. Trust didn't appear because someone shoved a bully once. Trust was built, and Dudley knew he'd spent 11 years doing the opposite of building. But something had changed anyway. A crack in the wall, a weak point, a place where something else could start. A red-haired boy poked his head into the compartment a few minutes later. He looked at Harry, then at Dudley's clenched fists, and hesitated. "Everything all right?" the boy asked. Harry answered slowly, as if tasting the words. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." The boy nodded and vanished again. The train began to move. The countryside slid past the window. Fields, trees, distant hills. Dudley watched it with a strange emptiness in his chest, as if the familiar world was being peeled away 1 mile at a time. Night fell. The Scottish Highlands rose like dark giants in the distance. And then, through the window, Dudley saw it. A castle on the horizon, glittering against the black sky, enormous and unreal. Lights glowing in hundreds of windows. Hogwarts. Dudley pressed his face to the glass. His breath fogged the window. "What if I can't do this?" he whispered, barely audible. Harry didn't answer, because he was thinking the exact same thing. By the time they arrived, Dudley's hands were damp with sweat. The castle loomed above them. The lake was black and cold. Torches flickered in the hands of older students. Voices echoed in the stone entrance hall. Everything was too big, too old, too certain. Dudley felt like a mistake walking into a place that had never expected him. They stood in the line of first years, robes hanging strangely on Dudley's broad shoulders. Harry was a few people ahead, shoulders tight. Professor McGonagall called names. Harry's came early. Harry walked to the stool, sat, and the sorting hat dropped over his eyes. The great hall held its breath. Dudley watched Harry's face disappear under the brim, and realized with a jolt that Harry was afraid. Not of being laughed at, not of being bullied, afraid of being sorted wrong, afraid of ending up somewhere that would make his life harder than it already was. The hat murmured. No one else could hear it, but Dudley saw Harry's fingers grip the edge of the stool. Seconds stretched. Then the hat shouted, "Gryffindor!" The red table erupted in applause. Harry stumbled off the stool, looking relieved and pale. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. Dudley knew his own turn was coming. His name was called. "Dursley, Dudley." The great hall went oddly quiet. Dudley walked forward, feeling like he was approaching an execution. He sat on the stool. The hat dropped over his eyes, and the world turned into darkness and fabric. A voice spoke in his head. "Well," it said thoughtfully. Dudley's throat tightened. He didn't know how to think at it. Didn't know if he was supposed to respond. The hat hummed. "Interesting," it murmured. "Very interesting." Dudley's stomach sank. He could hear whispers beyond the brim. "Is that a muggle? He's huge. Why is he here? Potter's cousin. Dudley clenched his fists so hard his nails bit his palms. The hat seemed to take its time, as if weighing something. There is magic here, it said at last, voice quieter now, as if speaking only to Dudley. Not polished, not trained, but stubborn, protective, loyal, even when you don't deserve the people you're loyal to. Dudley's breath caught. He didn't understand how a hat could know anything about him. You were raised to be cruel, the hat continued. But you are not cruelty itself. You are something else buried under it. Dudley's chest felt tight. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say he was exactly what his father said he was. But another part of him, small and stubborn, wanted the hat to be right. You fear you don't belong, the hat said. You fear you will be laughed at. You fear you will fail. Dudley swallowed. The hat's voice warmed slightly, like a decision settling. But you will endure, it said. You will work. You will stay. You will stand when others run. And when you will love like a shield. The hat paused. Then, with sudden certainty, it shouted, Hufflepuff! Polite applause rose from the yellow table. Not thunderous, not excited, just a welcoming rhythm. Dudley stood up and walked toward the Hufflepuff table, feeling hollow. Different house, different dormitory, different life. Harry sat at Gryffindor, far away under red and gold, surrounded by strangers who looked like they already belonged to each other. Dudley sat at Hufflepuff, surrounded by people who glanced at him with curiosity and a hint of suspicion. He forced himself to smile once, stiffly. Nobody smiled back. The first week nearly broke him. In Charms, Professor Flitwick stood atop a stack of books and made levitating a feather look effortless. Swish and flick, Flitwick chirped. Dudley swished and flicked. Nothing happened. His wand felt like a dead stick in his hand. He tried again. Nothing. The boy beside him snorted. A girl behind him whispered loudly enough for Dudley to hear, He's the Muggle cousin. Dudley's ears burned. In Transfiguration, McGonagall's eyes were sharp as blades. Focus, she said. Dudley focused until his head ached. His matchstick remained a matchstick. Someone laughed. In Potions, Snape's gaze lingered on Dudley with cold interest. Like Dudley was an unpleasant ingredient he was forced to handle. Dursley, Snape drawled. I assume you know the difference between the root of asphodel and wormwood. Dudley stared. His mind went blank. Laughter rippled. Snape's lip curled. Of course you don't. Dudley stopped eating in the Great Hall by the end of the week. Too many eyes. Too many whispers. He claimed he wasn't hungry, shoved food around his plate, and left early. He began spending evenings in the library, not because he liked books, but because the library was quiet and the shelves made him feel hidden. He didn't know what he was doing. He just knew he couldn't go back to the dormitory where boys snickered and called him names. He didn't know yet that Harry noticed. Harry found him on the third night. It was past midnight. The library was dark except for a few floating lamps. Dudley sat at a table with his wand in front of him, and an open book he wasn't really reading. Harry slipped into the seat opposite him like he belonged there. You're going to get caught, Harry whispered. Dudley didn't look up. Don't care, he muttered. Harry's gaze dropped to Dudley's wand. Dudley's fingers tightened around it. Maybe Dad was right, he thought bitterly. Maybe I am just a freak who can't even do freak things properly. The thought tasted like poison because it came with a second one. Maybe I deserve it. Harry reached into his bag and pulled out his own wand. Show me the movement again, Harry said quietly. Dudley blinked and finally looked up. What? Harry tapped the book with one finger. The feather charm, he said. You're doing it wrong. Your wrist. It's too stiff. Dudley's chest tightened. You're helping me? he said, like the idea was absurd. Harry's expression didn't soften, but it wasn't hard either. Yeah, Harry said. You helped me earlier. Dudley's stomach turned. He hadn't helped Harry. He'd shoved Malfoy. That was it. One moment, Harry didn't seem to care about the difference. Dudley swallowed and lifted his wand. Harry demonstrated the movement again, slow and precise. Dudley copied it. Nothing happened. He tried again. Nothing. He tried again, until his arm ached and anger started buzzing in his blood. I can't, Dudley said, voice cracking. Yes, you can, Harry said. Dudley almost laughed at how ridiculous it sounded. But Harry's voice wasn't mocking. It was stubborn. It sounded like someone who had survived by refusing to accept no as a final answer. They practiced until 2 in the morning. Swish and flick, swish and flick. Dudley's hand cramped. His shoulder burned, his pride bruised with every failure. On the 19th try, the feather rose 3 inches, not gracefully, not lightly. It hovered steady, stubborn, like something holding its ground. Dudley froze. He stared at it like it was a miracle, because it was. His breath caught. Harry's eyes widened slightly. Dudley's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even blink. The feather floated. It was proof that the letter hadn't been a mistake. Proof that Vernon had been wrong. Proof that Dudley wasn't just pretending in a world where pretending got you crushed. The feather dropped gently back to the table. Dudley exhaled a shaky sound. Harry leaned back, watching him. See? Harry whispered. Dudley's hands trembled. Your turn, Dudley said suddenly. Harry blinked. What? Dudley leaned forward, forcing the words out. Teach me something, he said. I'll teach you something. Harry's brows knit together. Like what? Harry asked, suspicious again. Dudley hesitated. Then, awkwardly, he let a grin pull at his mouth. It wasn't confident. It wasn't practiced. It was new. How to throw a punch, Dudley said. Harry stared. Dudley shrugged, as if the idea embarrassed him. Magic won't save you from everything, Dudley muttered. For a second, Harry looked like he might laugh. Then he didn't. But something in his shoulders eased. Just a fraction. They met every week after that. Spells and bruises, wands and fists. Quiet agreements made in library shadows. Where no one watched too closely, Dudley started eating again. Not much, but enough. Harry started walking a little less like he was alone in the world. Not safe, but less alone. And somewhere between the library stacks and Dudley's split knuckles, something changed. They stopped being cousins. They became something else. Not yet brothers. Not yet. But close enough that the word began to take shape in the space between them. And someone noticed. One night, as Dudley left the library with Harry, he felt a chill crawl up his spine. He turned. A figure stood in the shadows between shelves, cloak blending into darkness. Professor Snape. His eyes were dark and unreadable, fixed on Dudley with an intensity that made Dudley's stomach twist. Snape's gaze flicked to Harry, then back to Dudley, Petunia's son, Lily's nephew. Together. Snape's expression revealed nothing, but his hands trembled slightly at his sides, as if he was gripping something invisible. Dudley stared at him, uneasy. Snape said nothing. He simply turned and vanished into the darkness of the library, like a thought you couldn't shake. Dudley swallowed. What was that about? He whispered. Harry shook his head. No idea, Harry muttered. But Dudley could feel it, some weight shifting in the background of their lives, some thread pulling tight. As if the castle itself had taken note of Dudley Dursley and decided he mattered. 3 years later, everything would change. But for now, Dudley walked back to Hufflepuff, with his wand in his pocket, and bruises on his knuckles. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the world was built entirely without him. By fourth year, Dudley Dursley had learned the first rule of Hogwarts. You could survive almost anything if you could endure being watched. At 11, being watched had felt like knives. Every stare in the Great Hall, every whisper in corridors, every laugh when his wand did nothing. At 12 and 13, he'd learned to keep his shoulders square and his face blank. He'd learned to swallow humiliation like bitter medicine. He'd learned to work twice as hard for half as much progress. And he'd learned that some people never forgave him for being strange. Not because of magic, because of Harry Potter, because of Privet Drive. Hufflepuff had become, not home exactly, but a place he could stand without trembling. He had friends, if you could call them that. People who would share notes, nod at him in the common room, make room at the table. People who accepted Dudley's usefulness more than they accepted Dudley himself. And that was enough, most days. He was still clumsy with spells, he still struggled with anything delicate, but he could produce light, could clean his cauldron without melting it, could shield well enough to avoid embarrassment. And when it came to brute force magic, charms that required will more than finesse, he was improving in stubborn, visible increments. No one called him the Muggle cousin anymore. Not to his face. They had found better insults. Sharper ones. Ones that didn't sound ignorant. But Dudley had learned something else too. Hogwarts bullies were the same as Muggle bullies. They just had different weapons. And Dudley, unfortunately, had always been good at recognizing them. It started on a night that was supposed to be a celebration. The Triwizard Tournament arrived like a storm rolling in from the sea. Visiting schools, foreign accents, rumors and excitement buzzing through corridors. The castle seemed to swell with energy, as if the old stones enjoyed being the center of the world again. Students talked about the champions like they were mythic figures. Older boys practiced posing as if they might be chosen by accident. Girls whispered about Beauxbatons, about Durmstrang, about famous names and famous faces. Dudley tried not to care. He pretended it was all noise. But the truth was, the tournament made something in him ache. Not envy of fame, envy of belonging, because everyone else looked at Hogwarts like it had always been theirs, like it was their birthright, their inheritance. Dudley still felt, sometimes, like a man trespassing in a house that might notice and throw him out. Harry, meanwhile, looked as if he'd been carved out of the tournament's shadow. Harry didn't chase glory. Harry didn't talk about the champions with starry-eyed excitement. Harry watched, always watched. And Dudley, who knew him now, really knew him in ways no one at Gryffindor truly did, could tell when Harry was uneasy. It wasn't fear, it was the sense that trouble was circling, and Harry had spent his entire life being the point where trouble landed. The night of the sorting of the champions, Dudley sat with Hufflepuff, listening to Cedric Diggory's friends roar his name as if he'd personally saved the school. Cedric stood taller than usual, looking embarrassed and pleased all at once. A golden figure under candlelight. Professor Dumbledore's voice was warm as he explained the tournament rules again, as if repetition might keep them safe. The goblet of fire burned bright blue. Names burst out in flame. Victor Crumb, Fleur Delacour, Cedric Diggory. Applause. Cheers, everything as it was supposed to be. Then the goblet spat out a final name, Harry Potter. For a heartbeat, Dudley thought he'd misheard. The great hall went silent in a way that made the hair on Dudley's arms rise. Then, confusion, shouting, laughter that sounded too sharp, angry voices, 100 heads turning at once. Dudley looked at Harry. Harry's face had gone pale. He looked as stunned as Dudley felt, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if he'd been slapped. Harry didn't look triumphant. He didn't look smug. He looked like a boy who had just been handed a noose. Dudley stood halfway from his seat, instinct yanking him upward, before his mind caught up. Across the hall, at the Gryffindor table, Ron Weasley was staring at Harry with a face that looked betrayed. Hermione's expression had tightened into fierce worry. The twins looked delighted in a way that made Dudley want to shake them. At the staff table, Snape's gaze locked on Harry like a blade finding its mark. And then the murmurs began. Of course he did it. Attention-seeking. Potter's always in the middle of everything. Cheater. Dudley sat back down slowly, feeling his hands tighten around the edge of the bench. He turned to the Hufflepuff students around him. They were staring at Harry with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Not all of them, but enough. Cedric's friends, boys Dudley had eaten beside, laughed with, traded homework notes with, were leaning toward each other, faces twisted. That's rubbish, someone muttered. He's stolen it. It's Potter, another replied. He always gets what he wants. Dudley's stomach turned. He watched Cedric's face. Cedric didn't look furious. He looked thoughtful, uncertain, like he didn't want to believe Harry would do it. But he couldn't ignore the fact that Harry Potter's name had come out of a goblet that was supposed to choose only 3. Dudley felt something cold settle in his chest. He knew what was coming, because he'd seen it before. When a group decided someone was a target, truth didn't matter anymore. The next day, the badges appeared. Potter stinks. They were everywhere, blooming like a disease across robes. Students wore them openly, laughing, showing them off like they'd invented cruelty. When pressed, they claimed it was a joke, just a laugh, harmless fun. Dudley saw Hufflepuffs wearing them. That was the part that made him feel sick. Hufflepuff was supposed to be fair, loyal, kind. That's what they told themselves. But loyalty was easy when it cost nothing. The badge pinned to the robe of a boy Dudley had once called a friend made Dudley's jaw tighten. Come on, Dud, the boy said, grinning as if this was camaraderie. It's just a laugh. Dudley stared at the badge. Potter stinks. Harry's name like filth. Dudley could almost hear Vernon's voice in the words, could almost hear Privet Drive's laughter echoing through the castle halls. He didn't laugh. He didn't pin one on. He just looked at the boy until the boy's grin faltered. It's not funny, Dudley said. The boy rolled his eyes. You're still doing that, are you? Still following Potter around like a guard dog? Dudley's face flushed hot. He hated the fact that it stung, because the boy wasn't entirely wrong. Dudley did watch Harry. Dudley did position himself in corridors sometimes. Did find himself listening for laughter that sounded too sharp. Not because he worshipped Harry, because he knew what it felt like to be surrounded by people who thought hurting you was entertainment. He didn't answer. The boy shrugged and walked off, badge flashing. By the end of the week, the school had turned. Even Gryffindors whispered sometimes, eyes sliding away when Harry passed. Dudley watched Harry walk through corridors alone, head down, shoulders hunched. The famous boy made small by 100 small cruelties, and Dudley, who had once been the biggest cruelty in Harry's life, felt something inside him twist with a violence he didn't have words for. He wanted to fix it, but you couldn't fix a crowd. You could only stand against it. It happened near the kitchens. Dudley hadn't planned to be there. He was coming back from herbology, hands smelling of damp earth and crushed leaves, when he heard voices ahead, low, sharp, laughing. He slowed. He knew that laugh. He knew the sound of boys who were enjoying someone else's fear. Dudley rounded the corner and saw 4 Hufflepuffs blocking the corridor. One's out, smirks wide. Harry stood with his back near the wall, hand hovering near his wand but not drawing it fully. His eyes were controlled, but Dudley saw the tension in his jaw. saw the way Harry was measuring distance and escape routes. Harry wasn't scared. Harry was calculating, which was worse, because calculating meant he'd learned how often the world wanted him cornered. Cheater. One of the boys spat. You stole Cedric's glory. Another said, stepping closer. Harry's voice was quiet. I didn't put my name in, the boys laughed. Course you did, one said. Bet you used some dark magic, didn't you? Harry's gaze sharpened. Move, or what? The leader sneered. You'll hex us? Little famous Potter thinks he can do whatever he likes. They didn't see Dudley coming. He stepped into the corridor like a wall. All 6 feet of him, shoulders squared, fists clenching by instinct. His robe swayed around his legs. Hufflepuff colors bright against stone. The boys froze. Dudley's presence changed the shape of the space. It always did. Walk away, Dudley said. The leader blinked, then smirked as if relieved. Oh, it's you. He flicked his wand slightly. What are you going to do, Dursley? You'll fail to curse us. The others sniggered. Dudley felt his mouth curve into something that wasn't friendly. I won't need a curse, he said. The leader laughed again, right up until Dudley's fist connected with his jaw. The sound was dull and sickening. The boy staggered back, shocked, more than hurt at first. Then he stumbled and hit the wall hard. Dudley turned and hit the second boy in the stomach before the boy could raise his wand properly. The boy folded with a wheeze. The third punch never landed, because the remaining 2 boys took one look at Dudley's face, at the sudden certainty in his posture, and they ran. Harry didn't move for a moment. He stared at Dudley like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Dudley stood between Harry and the space where the boys had been, breathing hard, fists stinging, adrenaline rushing hot through his veins. He didn't feel guilty. Not yet. He felt calm, like he'd done something simple and correct. Harry swallowed. You, Dudley cut him off without looking back. Don't. Harry's voice tightened. They were going to curse me. I know, Dudley said. Silence stretched. Then footsteps echoed. Professor Sprout came round the corner, robes swishing, expression sharp. Her eyes took in the scene instantly. The groaning boy on the floor, the other curled against the wall, Harry pressed back, Dudley standing like a guard. Her gaze landed on Dudley. Mr. Dursley, she said, voice crisp. Detention, 1 month. Dudley nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He knew he'd hit students. He knew Hogwarts had rules. He also knew, deep down, that if he'd hesitated, if he'd tried to solve it with words, Harry would have been hurt. Sprout's eyes flicked to Harry, then back to Dudley. Her expression shifted just slightly, as if something in her sternness softened at the edges. Why? She asked quietly, a question aimed at Dudley alone. Dudley's throat tightened. He could have said because it wasn't fair. He could have said because bullying is wrong. He could have said because they deserved it, but none of those were the real reason. He met Professor Sprout's eyes, and his voice came out rough. He's my brother, Dudley said. Professor Sprout stared at him. Then, slowly, she nodded once. Detention, she repeated, because rules were rules. But her tone wasn't cruel. It was almost respectful. She ushered the injured boys away with a flick of her wand and a sharp command to get to the hospital wing. When she left, the corridor fell quiet. Harry leaned against the wall, breathing shallowly. Dudley's hands were still clenched. Dudley, Harry said softly. Dudley turned his head, finally looking at him. Harry's eyes were bright with something that wasn't tears, but wasn't far from them. Anger, maybe. Relief. Shock. You didn't have to do that, Harry said. Dudley exhaled through his nose. Yes, he said, I did. Harry opened his mouth, then closed it, as if he didn't know how to argue with that. Dudley's knuckles throbbed. He flexed his fingers, watching the skin stretch. He expected regret to hit him like it used to after he'd hurt someone in primary school. Regret that came from being told off. Regret that came from consequences. But this was different. This wasn't regret. It was certainty. He looked down the corridor where the boys had run and felt a bitter, unfamiliar thing in his chest. Pride. Not in violence. In choosing the side he hadn't chosen before. That night, Dudley sat alone in the Hufflepuff dormitory, the room dim, except for a candle on his bedside table. The others were asleep or pretending to be. Dudley could feel the tension in the air. Questions, judgment, discomfort. He knew some of them thought he'd embarrassed the house. He knew some of them thought he'd gone soft. He knew some of them simply didn't want to be associated with Harry Potter's trouble. Dudley didn't care. He pulled out parchment. He dipped a quill. His hand hovered for a long time, trembling slightly. Finally, he began to write. Dear Mum. The words looked strange on the page. Dudley had never written letters like this. Not real ones. Not ones that mattered. He swallowed and continued. I think I understand now why Aunt Lily died. His throat tightened as he wrote the name. Not Lily the freak, not Lily the shame, but Lily as a person who had chosen something. She had someone worth dying for. Dudley's eyes blurred. He blinked hard and kept writing because stopping felt like cowardice. I think I do too. He stared at the sentence for a long time. The candle flame flickered. The dormitory was quiet. Dudley's hand shook. He wanted to add more. To say, I'm sorry. To say, why did you do it? To say, I'm afraid. To say I don't know who I am without Dad's voice in my head. But he couldn't. Not yet. He folded the letter, pressed it flat, and tucked it into his trunk without sending it. He wasn't ready for the answer. He wasn't ready to find out whether Petunia's new resolve would last when confronted with Dudley's anger. He lay down and stared at the ceiling, listening to distant castle sounds and thinking of Harry. Harry, alone in Gryffindor, wearing a target on his back. Harry, who had once been alone in a cupboard while Dudley slept behind a proper door. Dudley turned onto his side and clenched his fists under the blankets until the ache in his knuckles grounded him. He had chosen. Once. He would have to choose again. Because the tournament wasn't the danger. The tournament was just the stage. And on stages like this, something always waited in the wings. The summer after the tournament should have felt like relief. Cedric Diggory was gone. Dead. Spoken about in hushed voices that made the corridors feel colder. The Triwizard Cup had become a symbol nobody wanted to look at too closely. The school scattered for the holidays like it always did. Students boarding the train with trunks and tired goodbyes, clutching the last scraps of normal. Dudley expected the world to breathe out. Instead, it held its breath, because when Dudley stepped off the Hogwarts Express, he didn't step back into his old life. He stepped into a life with no map. They didn't return to number 4. They couldn't. Vernon had meant what he said. The house was his, and his hatred had become a padlock. Petunia didn't fight him for it, not in any official way. Dudley found out, in jagged pieces, that wizard money and wizard solutions didn't magically untangle Muggle law. Petunia could have tried to take Vernon to court. She could have begged relatives. She could have called neighbors and spun stories. But Petunia had always been terrified of attention. And now, after the truth had cracked open, she was terrified of something else too, what Vernon might do if he felt cornered. So they stayed in places that weren't theirs. A slightly better hotel for a while, then a small rented flat that smelled like damp wallpaper and old cooking oil. It had thin walls and a back stairwell where someone's radio played too loud at night. Petunia scrubbed it as if cleanliness could disguise how temporary everything felt. She rearranged furniture twice in the first week. She lined cupboards with paper. She tried to shape the space into something stable. Dudley watched her do it and understood, in a way he'd never understood before, that Petunia's obsession with neatness wasn't about pride. It was about control. And control was the only thing she'd ever had when magic had taken everything else. Harry lived there too, not in a cupboard, not under the stairs, in a real bedroom, even if it was small. A bed with sheets, a door that closed, a desk by the window. The first night, Dudley lay awake listening for the sound of Harry being ordered around. It never came. The silence felt strange, like the house was waiting for someone to start shouting. The first few weeks were awkward in a way Dudley had no words for. Petunia didn't know how to be kind without sounding like she was issuing instructions. Harry didn't know how to accept anything without suspicion. Dudley didn't know how to exist in a home where he wasn't the sun and Harry wasn't the shadow. They circled each other carefully. Harry spent long hours on the small balcony outside his room, looking out at the street like he expected something to appear. Owl Post still came. Quiet, sudden flutters in the night. Letters dropped on the windowsill. Sometimes Harry read them quickly and hid them away. Sometimes he stared at them for ages. Expression unreadable. Dudley got owls too now. That was the strangest part. At first, he'd panicked every time a bird arrived. Owls had become messengers of a world that had burned down his old one. But slowly, he learned to accept them. He learned that he could open a letter without something exploding. He learned that ink could contain ordinary things: homework lists, school book requirements, notes from teachers. He learned, painfully, that the wizarding world expected him to keep up, no matter how hard it was, no matter how out of place he felt, no matter how many times he'd stare at his wand and wonder whether it hated him. Dudley spent the summer practicing, not because he loved magic, because he refused to go back to Hogwarts and be laughed at again. Harry helped him sometimes, but not in the patient, gentle way Dudley had once imagined help looked like. Harry was brisk. Harry corrected him sharply. Harry refused to let Dudley quit. Dudley, in return, made Harry go outside, made him eat properly, made him hit a punching bag Dudley found at a cheap sports shop down the road, because Dudley had learned something important in the last year. Anger didn't vanish just because you wanted it to. Anger needed somewhere to go. Otherwise, it turned inward. Harry didn't talk much about Cedric. He didn't talk much about what had happened in the graveyard. But Dudley saw it in him anyway. The way Harry's eyes snapped up at sudden noises. The way he flinched at certain shadows. The way he sat with his back to walls. And Dudley saw something else too. Fear. Not fear of being bullied. Fear of being disbelieved. Because Harry kept saying one name under his breath sometimes when he thought no one was listening. Voldemort. And Petunia, who could feel the shape of danger even if she couldn't name it, moved around the flat like she was bracing for impact. The Order of the Phoenix arrived in their lives like a secret opening, not with a dramatic knock and a parade of wands, with a man at the end of the street who looked up too often, with a cat that sat on the garden wall for hours, eyes too intelligent, with the sense of being watched, not by neighbors this time, but by something older, smarter, and more necessary. Harry noticed first. Of course he did. Dudley noticed because Harry did. They didn't speak about it directly. Saying it out loud made it real, and Dudley had spent years learning that real danger was the kind you pretended you didn't see. But one evening, as they walked back from the small grocery shop, Dudley felt it, a sudden drop in temperature. Not the natural coolness of night. Something sharper, something that crawled under skin. Harry stopped mid-step, his head turned slightly, as if listening. "What is it?" Dudley asked, voice low. Harry didn't answer immediately. His hand slipped into his pocket. onto his wand. Dudley's stomach tightened, because Harry looked afraid, not startled, not annoyed, afraid. Inside, Harry said quietly. Dudley frowned. We're nearly inside, Harry repeated, harsher. Dudley obeyed, because he'd learned that when Harry's voice sounded like that, you didn't argue. They stepped into an alleyway between buildings. It smelled of damp brick and old rubbish. The street lamp at the corner flickered, then dimmed. Dudley's breath fogged in front of him. He stared at it, confused. It was summer. It shouldn't be cold. Harry's eyes scanned the darkness. Then Dudley heard it, a sound like something wet dragging over stone, a faint, rattling breath, a presence. The air turned heavy, as if the world itself had become water. Dudley's chest tightened. He felt a pull in his mind, not a thought, not a memory, but a sensation, like invisible fingers reaching inside him. He tasted despair. It was immediate and intimate, like it had been waiting in him all along. Dudley stumbled back, heart slamming. "What is?" he tried, but his voice sounded wrong, thin and shaken. Harry's wand was out now, pointed into the darkness. "Dementors," Harry whispered. The word meant nothing to Dudley. And then it meant everything. Two shapes glided into view. They weren't running, weren't walking. They moved, like they didn't need the ground. Their cloaks floated around them, as if the fabric was alive. Where their faces should have been, there was only shadow beneath a hood. And yet, Dudley felt them looking at him, not with eyes, with hunger. The alley seemed to narrow. The walls pressed closer. The world dimmed. Dudley's mind began to fill with voices. Vernon's voice. Freak, worthless, freak. Dudley's legs went weak. He tried to step back, but his feet felt glued to the ground. The Dementors drifted closer. Harry's voice cut through the cold, sharp and urgent. Expecto Patronum. A burst of silver light shot from Harry's wand. Thin at first, flickering, then strengthening. The shape wasn't fully formed, but it was enough to make the Dementors hesitate. Dudley's lungs burned. He couldn't breathe properly. The cold was inside his ribs now, squeezing. One Dementor tilted its hood toward Harry and glided closer, ignoring the light as if it was willing to endure pain for food. Harry's face tightened. His spell faltered for a second. Dudley saw it. Harry was fighting, and Harry was losing. Dudley's wand hand shook. He didn't even know if his wand would respond. He didn't know if he could do anything, but his body moved anyway, just like it had moved on the train, just like it had moved in the corridor near the kitchens. Instinct first, thought later. Dudley stepped between Harry and the Dementor. He spread his arms slightly, not in a dramatic gesture, just the way you position yourself to take a hit instead of someone else. Harry's head snapped up. "What are you doing?" Harry hissed. Dudley didn't answer, because he couldn't. The cold hit him like a truck. It wasn't just cold, it was violation. It reached inside his skull and yanked. Dudley gasped. Images crashed through him. Harry in the cupboard, small and silent, while Dudley laughed. Harry flinching when Petunia touched him. Vernon's face twisted with disgust as he called Dudley a freak. Petunia's voice screaming, "He is my son," as if she could rewrite the past with volume. Dudley's stomach lurched. The Dementor leaned closer, and Dudley felt the world dim further. He heard his own worst thoughts. "You're nothing. You don't belong. You'll fail. You'll always be what your father made you." Dudley's knees buckled. He wanted to curl into himself. He wanted to disappear. And then, through the crushing weight, another memory surfaced. Not a birthday cake. Not anything his parents had given him. Harry in the library at midnight, patient and stubborn. showing Dudley the wand movement again and again without mocking him. Harry saying, "Yes, you can," with a kind of certainty Dudley had never been given. Harry believing in him when no one else did. The memory wasn't bright. It wasn't joyous. But it was warm. It was the warmth of being seen as something other than a joke. Dudley clung to it like a rope. Something pulsed in his chest. Not words, not an incantation. Pressure. Warm and heavy, like the air itself refusing to let Harry be touched. A flash of golden light burst outward from Dudley's body. Not from him. It wasn't a Patronus. There was no animal, no shape, just a wave of warmth that shoved against the cold. The Dementor recoiled, cloak rippling as if it had been slapped. It hesitated, just for a second. But a second was all Harry needed. Harry's voice cracked like a whip through the alley. Expecto Patronum. This time, the silver light erupted with force. A stag burst from the wand, bright and blazing, hooves striking sparks against nothing as it charged. The Dementors fled. They didn't retreat like ordinary creatures. They dissolved backward into the night, as if the darkness swallowed them whole. The temperature lifted abruptly, leaving Dudley's body shuddering. He collapsed against the brick wall, gasping, arms shaking as the cold slowly released its grip. Harry was beside him instantly, grabbing his shoulder. "What the hell was that?" Harry demanded. Dudley couldn't answer properly. He stared at his hands, at his wand, at the faint, lingering warmth in his chest. He swallowed, throat raw. "I don't know." Harry's eyes were wide, almost furious. "You didn't cast it," Harry said, voice tight. "You didn't say anything." "I felt it," Dudley whispered. "I felt something." Harry stared at him like Dudley had just rewritten the rules of the world. Dudley looked back, breathing hard. For the first time in 5 years at Hogwarts, Dudley truly believed it. He belonged. Not because he was good at spells, not because people liked him, because in the moment it mattered most, something inside him had answered. But the world didn't reward heroism. The Ministry didn't care that 2 Dementors had attacked 2 underage wizards in a Muggle alley. The Ministry cared about control, and Harry Potter, who always attracted chaos like a magnet, had produced a Patronus outside school. Within the hour, an owl arrived. It came through the open window of the flat with frantic urgency, landing hard on the table, as if even the bird was nervous. Petunia screamed when she saw it. Then she clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide, trembling. Dudley stared. He'd grown used to owls. Petunia hadn't. Not really. Harry snatched the letter off its leg and tore it open. His face went blank as he read. Dudley watched the color drain from him. "What?" Dudley demanded. Harry held the parchment out. Dudley took it, fingers clumsy, and read. It wasn't just Harry. It was Dudley, too. Both of them had been summoned. Both of them were accused. Expulsion pending a hearing. Dudley's chest tightened. He looked up sharply. "They can't," he started. Harry's laugh was short and bitter. "They can," Harry said. "They always can." Petunia stood frozen by the sink. Her hands shook. She looked at Dudley, really looked, like she was seeing his fear and realizing it was her fault too, because she had brought him into a world she barely understood. Then her gaze snapped to Harry, and something shifted in her expression. Not jealousy, not disgust, something like terror. Because this wasn't just Hogwarts now. This was the Ministry. This was power. This was the thing Petunia had spent her whole life pretending didn't exist, and now it was reaching into her home and threatening to take both boys away. Harry's jaw tightened. "We have to go," he said. "Where?" Dudley asked, voice rough. Harry looked at him, eyes hard. "Hogwarts," he said. Dumbledore. The name landed like a weight. Dudley had seen Dumbledore only at a distance, an old man with twinkling eyes and a presence that made the whole hall feel smaller. Dudley didn't know him. Dudley didn't know if anyone truly did. But Harry said the name like it was the only solid thing left. That night, they left under cover of darkness, not with a suitcase and a bus ticket. With magic, a cloaked figure appeared at their door. A woman with a stern face and a voice that didn't allow questions. She ushered them out, warned Petunia to keep her head down, and led them into a world that folded and shifted in ways Dudley still couldn't fully process. They arrived at Hogwarts as dawn bled pale across the sky. The castle looked different when you weren't arriving as a child. It looked older, heavier, more like a fortress than a school. They were brought to the headmaster's office. The stone gargoyle moved aside with a muttered password. A spiral staircase carried them upward, and Dudley felt his stomach churn as if the castle itself was measuring him. The office smelled of old paper and lemon drops, and something like warm wood. Portraits watched from the walls, eyes following them. A phoenix sat on a perch and regarded Dudley with unsettling intelligence. Dumbledore stood behind his desk. He looked calm, as if crises were simply weather passing through. "Harry," Dumbledore said softly. His gaze shifted to Dudley, and Dudley, hearing his name spoken like that, without contempt, without mockery, made Dudley's skin prickle. Petunia stood just inside the door, hands twisted together. She looked smaller in this room, as if Hogwarts stripped away her sharp edges and left only the frightened girl she'd once been. Dumbledore gestured to chairs. They sat. Harry didn't relax. Dudley didn't either. Dumbledore studied them for a long moment, eyes kind but far too sharp. "You wanted the truth," Dumbledore said gently, and his gaze settled on Petunia. "Now you shall have it." Petunia flinched as if he'd named a wound. Her hands tightened in her lap. "I wrote to you," she whispered. Harry's head snapped up. Dudley stared. Petunia's voice trembled. "When I was 11, she continued, "I begged you to let me come to Hogwarts." Dudley's chest tightened. He had known, vaguely, that Petunia had been jealous of Lily. But hearing it like this, hearing his mother admit it in front of Harry, made it feel real in a way that was almost unbearable. "You refused," Petunia said, voice cracking. "You said magic wasn't something that could be learned, that I didn't have it, that I never would." Tears slipped down her cheeks. Dudley had seen his mother cry only a handful of times in his life. Never like this, never with her whole body shaking. "Lily got everything," Petunia whispered. "The letters, the wand, the world." She swallowed hard, eyes squeezing shut. "And I got nothing but a lifetime of watching her shine from the outside." Harry sat very still. Dudley glanced at him. Harry's face was blank, but his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Petunia opened her eyes and looked at Harry. Really looked. "I hated her," she said, voice raw, "for leaving me behind." Dudley's stomach dropped, and when she died, Petunia continued, tears falling freely now. "I hated you too, because every time I looked at you, I saw everything I'd lost." The words landed like stones. Dudley felt them hit Harry, even though Harry didn't move. He felt them hit himself too, because Petunia hadn't just harmed Harry. She had twisted Dudley into a weapon. Dudley's chair scraped back suddenly. He stood. His chest heaved. "You made me hate him," Dudley said, voice shaking with anger he hadn't known how to name until now. "You turned me into Dad." Petunia looked up at him, eyes wide, guilt tearing through her face. "I know," she sobbed. "I know what I did." Dudley swallowed hard, throat burning. "I can't undo it," Petunia whispered. Harry's voice cut into the silence, quiet and sharp. "You could have told me," he said. Petunia's eyes snapped to him. Harry's gaze was steady, but there was a tremor in his voice, a fragile honesty that made Dudley's chest ache. "I would have understood," Harry said. Petunia stared. Then her mouth twisted into something like a painful smile. "Would you?" she whispered. Her voice broke again, softer this time. "Could you have forgiven me?" Harry didn't answer. He couldn't, because forgiveness wasn't a switch you flipped. Forgiveness was work, and Harry had been doing nothing but work to survive his whole life. Dumbledore spoke into the heavy silence. "The blood protection I placed on Harry," he said, voice gentle, "was never fueled by love, Petunia." Petunia's breath hitched. "It was fueled by your guilt." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Dudley felt cold prick along his spine. Guilt, not love. The protection that had kept Harry alive, kept Voldemort away, had not been built on kindness. It had been built on shame, and shame could fade. Dumbledore's blue eyes dimmed slightly. "And guilt fades," he said quietly. Petunia's face went paper white. Dudley's stomach tightened. Harry already looked like he understood. "What does that mean?" Dudley demanded, voice hoarse. Dumbledore's gaze moved from Dudley to Harry. "It means," Dumbledore said softly, "that the protection is weakening." Dudley's breath caught. "It means Voldemort will sense it soon." The room seemed to tilt. Dudley grabbed the edge of the desk without meaning to, fingers gripping hard. Petunia made a strangled sound, like a sob trying to become a scream. Harry sat perfectly still. His face didn't change much, but Dudley saw it in his eyes. Resignation. The kind of look you get when you've always known the world was going to come for you, and someone has finally confirmed it. Dudley's heart hammered. "So what do we do?" he asked, almost pleading. "What do we do?" Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said very calmly, "We prepare." Preparing sounded like a word adults used when they had no power over what was coming. Dudley didn't like it. He didn't like the way Dumbledore said it calmly, as if Voldemort sensing the weakening protection was just another unpleasant administrative detail. He didn't like the way Harry didn't argue, didn't demand a better answer, because Harry had lived long enough with danger to know that sometimes prepare was all anyone had. Dudley wanted something solid, a plan he could punch, a door he could lock, a problem he could solve with brute force and stubbornness. But the world they'd stepped into didn't work that way. The hearing came fast. So fast it felt like the ministry had been waiting for an excuse. They didn't give Harry time to breathe, didn't give Dudley time to understand what he'd done in the alley. They sent owls with official stamps and threats wrapped in formal language. They sent warnings that sounded polite only because they were written in ink instead of shouted. Expulsion pending. Improper use of magic. Violation of the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery. They treated Dudley like an afterthought at first, until they remembered he existed. Until someone realized that Dudley Dursley was not only a wizard, but connected to Harry Potter by blood and history, and that connection made him interesting. And in the wizarding world, interesting often meant useful. Petunia tried to be brave. It showed in how she held her shoulders too stiffly, how she spoke too quickly, how she scrubbed her hands until her knuckles were raw. She was a woman who had spent her life pretending magic didn't exist, and now she was being dragged through it like a net. Dudley watched her and felt a strange, complicated anger, not just at Vernon, at the ministry, at the world, at himself, because Petunia wasn't innocent. Dudley knew that. Dudley had lived her choices. He had been shaped by them. But she was still his mother. and she was standing between two sons, one she'd harmed, one she'd spoiled, and trying, finally, to stop bleeding poison into them. The day they went to the ministry, Dudley woke before dawn. Harry was already awake too. Of course he was. Harry sat at the small kitchen table in their rented flat, with his wand laid beside his hand, as if it were a knife. His posture was still, controlled, but his eyes were bright with sleeplessness. Dudley leaned against the doorframe and watched him. "Do you think they'll expel you?" Dudley asked quietly. Harry's mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. "They'll try," Harry said. Dudley swallowed hard. It occurred to him then, with a slow, sick clarity, that Harry had been dealing with this, being targeted by powerful people, for years, and Dudley had been the kind of person who made it worse. Dudley sat down opposite him, forcing himself to meet Harry's gaze. "If they do," Dudley said, voice rough, "I'm leaving too." Harry blinked. "What?" he said sharply. Dudley held his gaze, stubbornness rising like a shield. "I'm not going back to Hogwarts without you," Dudley said. "I'm not." He swallowed. "I'm not going back to a place where I pretend I don't know you, or where people think they can do whatever they like to you." Harry's eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring. "You think this is about you proving something?" Harry demanded. Dudley flinched, because that was the kind of question that hit near the truth. But Dudley shook his head. "No," he said. "It's about not doing what I used to do." Harry stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked away, jaw tight. "You don't have to ruin your life because mine's messy," Harry muttered. Dudley's chest tightened. Harry still didn't believe fully that someone could choose him without obligation. Dudley leaned forward slightly. "It's my life," Dudley said. "I get to choose what I do with it." Harry's gaze flicked back to him. For a heartbeat, something softened in it. Then it hardened again, because Harry's instincts were not to accept comfort. They were to survive. Petunia appeared in the doorway, dressed too neatly for the hour, hair pinned back so tightly it made her scalp look pale. "Time," she said, voice thin. They left together. The journey to the ministry was one Dudley would never forget, partly because it felt like walking through the throat of a beast. They entered through a public phone box that wasn't really a phone box. Petunia's hands shook as she dialed the number. The box rattled and dropped them like a stone. Dudley's stomach lurched. Harry barely reacted. The ministry's atrium opened around them. Greenish light, polished stone, golden statues, people moving with purpose. It felt like a cathedral built for bureaucracy. Everything was too grand for what it really was, a place where power decided who mattered. Dudley's eyes caught on the statue in the center, witch and wizard standing tall, smaller figures clustered at their feet in poses that looked like gratitude. It made Dudley's skin crawl. Harry's face went flat as he looked at it. Petunia stared too long, as if she couldn't decide whether to hate the sight or mourn it. A wizard in robes approached them with clipped steps. He didn't greet Petunia like she was a person. He greeted her like she was a problem. "This way," he said. Dudley realized as they walked that the ministry didn't just feel intimidating. It felt designed to make you small. Corridors stretched like tunnels. Doors looked too heavy. Signs pointed to departments with names Dudley didn't understand. Magical law enforcement, improper use of magic office, Department of Mysteries. Mysteries. Even the names sounded like a threat. They were ushered into a courtroom that felt like a pit. Stone steps descended into darkness. Torches flickered. Chains hung from the ceiling like the room was built for punishment, not justice. Dudley's heart hammered. Petunia's breathing became audible, sharp in the quiet. Harry walked down the steps without hesitation, face set, shoulders squared. Dudley followed, fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to hit something. He wanted to protect Harry in a way that would be simple and visible, but he couldn't punch a courtroom. He couldn't punch law. He couldn't punch the way adults looked at Harry with suspicion and resentment. They sat. Wizards filed in. Dudley recognized a few faces from newspapers Harry had shown him. Cornelius Fudge, round and pompous. Dolores Umbridge, small and smiling in a way that made Dudley's skin crawl. Members of the Wizengamot, old and severe. They stared at Harry like he was an inconvenience. They stared at Dudley like he was unexpected. Petunia sat stiffly behind them, hands twisted together. Dudley glanced back at her once. She looked like she might break. The proceedings began. Fudge's voice boomed. Self-important. "Harry Potter," he said, drawing out the name as if he was tasting it. "You are hereby charged with the production of a Patronus charm on the evening of—" Dudley stopped listening to the words and started listening to the tone. It wasn't neutral. It wasn't fair. It was a man who had decided Harry was guilty and was now performing legality around that decision. Harry spoke when required, voice controlled. "I produced the Patronus because Dementors attacked us," Harry said. Murmurs rippled. Umbridge smiled like she enjoyed the sound. Fudge scoffed. "Dementors," he repeated, as if the word itself was ridiculous. In little whinging, Dudley's jaw tightened. He could still feel the cold, the violation, the way despair had tried to hollow him out. He wanted to stand up and shout that it was real, that the fear was real, that he'd been there, that he'd felt it. But Dudley had never spoken in places like this. Dudley was used to being loud only when it was safe, and this was not safe. Then Fudge's eyes slid to Dudley. "Mr. Dudley Dursley," he said, tone shifting into a kind of forced politeness, "you are also charged with the use of magic outside school." Dudley blinked. His heart slammed. "I didn't use magic," Dudley said before he could stop himself. Fudge's eyebrows lifted. The Wizengamot murmured again, offended by Dudley speaking out of turn. Umbridge's smile sharpened. "You were present," Umbridge purred, "and you are known to be newly magical." Dudley felt heat rise up his neck. Harry's head turned slightly, eyes warning Dudley to be careful. Dudley swallowed. "I was present," Dudley said, voice rough. "I didn't cast a spell, but the Dementors were real." Fudge stared at him like Dudley was a stain on his courtroom. "You expect us to believe," Fudge said slowly, "that Dementors left Azkaban to attack two boys in a Muggle suburb?" "Yes," Dudley snapped. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Petunia made a small sound behind them. Harry's eyes flashed. Dudley realized too late that he had just done what the Ministry wanted. He had given them a reason to paint him as unstable, emotional, unreliable. Fudge leaned forward. "And why," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "would Dementors target you, Mr. Dursley?" Dudley's fists clenched. He didn't know. He didn't know why anything in Harry's life ever happened the way it did. But he knew this. If he stayed silent, the Ministry would swallow the truth and spit out a lie. Dudley lifted his chin. "Because I was with Harry," he said, "and because you can't control what's happening anymore." Silence. For a heartbeat, the courtroom froze. Then voices erupted. Outraged murmurs, angry whispers, offended gasps. Umbridge's smile widened, as if Dudley had handed her a gift. Fudge's face darkened. "How dare you?" he began, and then a voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough! Dumbledore." He rose from the benches, as if he'd been there all along, which he had, of course, because Dumbledore always seemed to arrive exactly where power was being misused. Dudley's chest loosened slightly, as if someone had opened a window in a suffocating room. Dumbledore spoke calmly, precisely. He produced witnesses. He produced logic. He dismantled the ministry's performance piece by piece, until it became obvious, even to the most stubborn, that expelling Harry over this would be absurd. It didn't make the ministry admit they were wrong. Nothing could make them do that. But it forced them begrudgingly to back down. The verdict came after what felt like hours. Harry was cleared. Dudley was cleared too, though Dudley noticed how reluctantly the words left their mouths, how annoyed they looked at being forced into fairness. As they left the courtroom, Dudley caught Umbridge's gaze. She smiled at him like she was already planning. Dudley felt a chill crawl up his spine. Because he understood something then, the ministry did not forget. If you embarrassed them, they waited. They waited until they could hurt you back in a way that looked legal. The summer after the hearing was worse than the fear of expulsion, because now they knew they were being watched, not protected. Watched. The Order's presence around their flat became more obvious. People loitered near entrances. A stranger would appear at the corner shop and pretend to browse without buying anything. An owl would arrive with warnings written between the lines. Petunia grew paler. Dudley grew angrier. Harry grew quieter. And then the letter arrived. Not from the ministry. From Hogwarts. Dudley tore it open with a kind of desperate hope that the page would say something normal. Instead it said, Dolores Umbridge appointed defense against the dark arts professor. Dudley stared at the name. He looked at Harry. Harry's face tightened in recognition. That's her, Dudley said quietly. Harry nodded once. Yes, Harry said. That's her. The first weeks back at Hogwarts felt like walking into a trap that had been laid carefully over the summer. The castle looked the same, smelled the same. Stone, dust, food, old magic. Students laughed in corridors, complained about homework, gossiped about Quidditch. But under it all was a tension Dudley had never felt so strongly before. A tightness in the air, a sense that the adults had stopped being safe. Umbridge entered the great hall on the first night in pink robes that looked absurd against the ancient stone. She smiled as if she was delighted to be there, delighted to teach, delighted to guide. Her eyes were sharp. Her smile never reached them. She gave a speech about order, about discipline, about the ministry's commitment to education. Dudley watched the staff table and saw McGonagall's jaw tighten, saw Flitwick's small frown, saw Snape's expression remain unreadable as always, and he saw Dumbledore's eyes, calm and distant, like he already knew this was going to be war. Umbridge took over defense against the dark arts like she was claiming territory. Her lessons were not lessons. They were obedience drills. No practical magic, no defensive spells, no preparation, just theory, just reading, just writing. Dudley sat in the classroom and felt his fists curl under the desk, because he remembered the Dementors. He remembered the cold. He remembered the way the world could turn lethal in seconds. And Umbridge was smiling and telling them that practical defense was unnecessary, that the ministry had everything under control. Dudley wanted to stand up and shout. Harry did stand up, metaphorically the way Harry always did, by refusing to be quiet. He challenged her. He spoke about Voldemort. He spoke about Cedric. He spoke truth in a room that wanted lies. Umbridge punished him for it. At first, Dudley didn't know how. He only noticed that Harry stopped sleeping properly, that Harry's hand was bandaged more often, that Harry's eyes looked sharper, harder, like something was scraping him raw from the inside. Then, one evening, Dudley found him. It was after dinner. Gryffindors were drifting back to their tower. Dudley had waited near a corridor that connected towards the defense classroom, stomach twisting with instinct. Harry appeared, walking stiffly. Dudley stepped out. Show me, Dudley said. Harry froze. What? Harry snapped. Too quick, too defensive. Dudley's gaze dropped to Harry's hand. The bandage was wrapped too tightly, as if someone had wanted pain, not protection. "Show me," Dudley repeated, voice low. Harry's jaw clenched. For a moment, Dudley thought Harry would refuse. Then Harry exhaled harshly and unwrapped the bandage. Dudley's stomach turned. Words were carved into Harry's skin, fresh and angry, the cut still red. "I must not tell lies." Dudley's vision went hot. He clenched his hands so tightly, his nails bit his palms. "She did that," Dudley said, voice shaking. Harry's face was blank. "It's detention," Harry said flatly, like the word explained everything. "That's not detention," Dudley hissed. He didn't have the word. Torture. Abuse. Something the adults of Privet Drive had done with locked doors and missed meals and laughter, something Dudley had been complicit in. Harry began wrapping the bandage again, expression closed. "Drop it," Harry muttered. Dudley's breath came hard. He wanted to storm into Umbridge's office and smash her smile into the wall. He wanted to grab her by her pink robes and shake her until the cruelty fell out of her. But he couldn't. Not without making it worse for Harry. Not without giving Umbridge exactly what she wanted. A reason to punish Harry further, by punishing Dudley too. So Dudley forced himself to stand still, shaking with rage. Harry looked up, eyes sharp. "Don't," Harry warned. Dudley swallowed. "I'm not going to do something stupid," Dudley said through his teeth. Harry's gaze held him for a moment, then softened slightly, just slightly. "Good," Harry said quietly. Dudley stared at him. Harry was bleeding, and Harry was still managing Dudley's anger, like Dudley's anger was the dangerous thing. That night, Dudley lay in his Hufflepuff bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breathing of boys who had no idea how close the world was to breaking. He thought about the scar on Harry's hand. He thought about the Dementors. He thought about Umbridge's smile. And then he thought about Hufflepuff, about loyalty, about how loyalty was supposed to be their thing, about how most of his housemates wore Potter Stinks badges last year and laughed like it was harmless, about how some of them now whispered that Harry was mad, that Harry was attention-seeking, that Harry was trying to cause trouble. Dudley clenched his jaw. Hufflepuff wasn't loyal by default. People were loyal by choice. And Dudley, who had been raised to choose cruelty, was going to choose differently. He began watching. Not spying, not scheming, watching the way a guard watches a door. He learned which corridors Umbridge patrolled. He learned which teachers looked away in fear, and which looked away in strategy. He learned which students repeated ministry lies because they believed them, and which repeated them because they wanted safety. He learned who could be trusted, and he learned slowly that Hufflepuff had more quiet courage than anyone gave it credit for. It just needed a spark. The spark came as a whisper passed through the school like contraband, a group, a secret, practical defense, someone teaching what Umbridge refused to teach. Dudley heard the rumor in the library first, from two Ravenclaws talking too quietly to be overheard. Except Dudley had always been good at hearing things people thought he wasn't listening to. Dudley's eyes narrowed. He didn't need to ask who was leading it. Only one person in Hogwarts was stubborn enough to start a rebellion out of sheer refusal to die quietly. Harry Potter. Dudley didn't wait for an invitation. He found Harry after breakfast, cornered him in a corridor, and kept his voice low. "You're doing it," Dudley said. Harry stared at him. "Doing what?" Harry asked, too innocent to be believable. Dudley's mouth twitched. "Don't," Dudley said. "I'm not thick." Harry's expression tightened. For a moment, Dudley saw the calculation in him. Risk assessment, trust assessment. Then Harry sighed. "You can't tell anyone," Harry said. Dudley's chest tightened. "Is that a joke?" Dudley muttered. Harry's gaze flicked to him, sharp. "This isn't..." Harry began. Dudley cut him off. "I've been keeping your secrets my whole life," Dudley said quietly. "Just not for the right reasons." Harry went still. The words landed between them like a confession. Dudley held Harry's gaze and forced himself to say the next part. "I'm in," Dudley said. "Whatever you're doing, I'm in." Harry stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "All right," Harry said. And just like that, Dudley Dursley stepped fully into the war behind the war. The one fought in corridors and whispered meetings and ink-stained parchment, not just in duels and battles. The first meeting was in the Hog's Head. Dudley had never been in a place like it. It smelled like stale ale and damp wood and something sour underneath. The windows were grimy. The air felt suspicious. The people there were too young to be planning rebellion, too young to be forced into it. Dudley stood near the back, broad shoulders pressed against the wall, scanning faces. He saw Gryffindors, Ravenclaws, Hufflepuffs. He saw fear. He saw determination. He saw Hermione Granger, looking like she'd already mapped every risk and written contingency plans in her head. He saw Ron Weasley, glaring at anyone who looked like they might doubt Harry. He saw Cho Chang's tense posture, the grief in her eyes like a bruise. He saw Ernie Macmillan, stiff and earnest, trying to look braver than he felt. Ernie caught Dudley's eye and looked startled, as if Dudley's presence was unexpected. Dudley didn't care. He was here. Harry spoke. Not like a leader, like a boy who had been forced into leadership by the incompetence of adults. He told them what the dark felt like. He told them what it meant to face Dementors. He told them what it meant to watch someone die. He didn't say Cedric's name often, but the absence of it made the room heavier. Dudley watched faces change as Harry spoke. Some disbelieved him. Some were frightened. But many, many believed, because Harry didn't speak like a liar. He spoke like someone carrying truth that was too heavy. When the meeting ended, Hermione passed around parchment for people to sign. Dudley watched names appear in ink, a list of children making themselves targets. His throat tightened. When the parchment reached him, he hesitated only a second. He wrote, "Dudley Dursley." The quill scratched the page. The name felt strange, not because it was his name, but because it meant something now. It meant he was choosing. After the meeting, Harry walked beside Dudley on the way back, both of them silent. Snow had begun to fall lightly, dusting the ground with white. Dudley's breath fogged. He glanced at Harry. Harry's face was tense, thoughtful. "You didn't have to sign," Harry said quietly. Dudley snorted. "You told me not to do something stupid," Dudley muttered. "This is me being smart." Harry's mouth twitched. It was almost a smile. They walked on. From that night onward, Dudley's life split into two layers. The surface, classes, homework, meals, the ordinary rhythm of school. Underneath, meetings in hidden rooms, whispered passwords, spells practiced in secret. Dudley learned defense properly for the first time. Not theory, not reading. Real spells, shield charms that snapped into place like invisible walls, stunning spells that required conviction, disarming spells that demanded precision. Dudley wasn't elegant. He never would be. But he was strong in a way that mattered. His shields held. His stance was solid. His magic had the same quality as his punches. Direct, stubborn, refusing to be moved. Harry watched him during practice, sometimes with a look Dudley couldn't quite name. Not pride, something like relief. Like Dudley's presence made the burden slightly less crushing. And Dudley, who had spent years being a burden, felt something steadier growing inside him. A sense of purpose. Not fame, not glory, just purpose. It didn't last. Nothing did. Umbridge eventually found them. It was inevitable. Secrets didn't stay secret forever in a castle full of living portraits and ghosts and students who wanted approval. The night the room of requirement was discovered, the air felt wrong from the start. Dudley arrived early, scanning the corridor. Harry and Hermione arrived after him, voices low, faces tense. Something in Hermione's posture made Dudley's stomach tighten. "What?" Dudley asked. Hermione's eyes flicked to him, then to Harry. "We think," Hermione began. Harry exhaled sharply. "Someone's talked," Harry said. Dudley's fists clenched. "Who?" Dudley demanded. Harry shook his head. "Doesn't matter," Harry said. "We need to—" They didn't get the chance. Footsteps thundered. Voices rose. Torches flared. Umbridge's high, pleased voice echoed down the corridor like a knife. "There you are." The corridor filled with ministry authority. Umbridge, aurors, teachers dragged along unwillingly. Students scattered. Dudley moved without thinking, stepping in front of Harry as he always did now, broad shoulders blocking the line of sight. Umbridge smiled at him. "Oh, Mr. Dursley," she cooed, as if she was delighted. "How very devoted." Dudley's jaw clenched. Harry's wand was in his hand. Dudley's wand was in his. The air felt like it might crack. Then Dumbledore arrived. Calm, powerful, too late, and exactly on time. He took control of the scene in a way Umbridge couldn't fully understand, because Umbridge's power was paperwork and cruelty, while Dumbledore's was something deeper. But even Dumbledore couldn't stop what came next, because the Ministry wanted Dumbledore gone. And Dumbledore, after watching Umbridge carve lies into Harry's skin and turn school into a cage, chose to leave on his own terms. The moment Dumbledore vanished in a flash of brilliant magic, Dudley felt something in the castle shift, like a pillar had been removed, like the last adult who could genuinely protect them had stepped away. Umbridge's smile turned triumphant. The school grew colder, and Dudley understood, with a sick certainty, that preparation had ended. Now it was endurance. Now it was survival. Now it was waiting for the war to finally spill through the cracks and drown them. After Dumbledore left, Hogwarts didn't feel like a school anymore. It felt like a captured place. The corridors looked the same: stone walls, moving staircases, portraits muttering, torches flickering, but everything underneath had changed. The air held a constant tension, the kind you tasted at the back of your throat. People spoke more softly. Laughter sounded thinner. Doors shut a little faster. Umbridge moved through the castle like she owned it, not like a teacher, like an occupying officer. Her decrees multiplied. They appeared overnight on walls, nailed up in places where students were forced to see them. Each one chipped away at something: freedom, privacy, safety, trust. The words were always polite. The effect was always cruel. Dudley began to notice how the castle responded. Portraits stopped offering gossip as freely. Ghosts drifted more quietly. Even Peeves seemed cautious sometimes, as if the usual chaos didn't feel safe in a place where cruelty was organized. Hufflepuff tightened around itself. Some of Dudley's dorm mates tried to ignore what was happening. Some convinced themselves it was temporary. Some laughed nervously and said it was for the best, because saying that made them feel like they were on the winning side of an argument. A few wore badges again, not Potter Stinks this time. Those had been last year's disease. Now it was different. Now it was the way people looked at Harry when he passed. The way some students muttered, "attention seeker," under their breath. The way they treated him like a problem that kept dragging danger into their lives. And in a way, they weren't wrong. Harry was a magnet for danger. But Harry wasn't the cause. Harry was just the boy standing nearest the lightning. Dudley watched Harry take it. Take the whispers, take the suspicion, take the false smiles, and felt his fists curl so often his hands began to ache. He remembered what Harry had said once a long time ago in the library. Yes, you can. Not a comfort. A command. Dudley needed a command now. Because this was the kind of year that could break people. The DA didn't die when Umbridge discovered the room. It scattered. It went underground. Deeper. They stopped meeting in large groups. They stopped using obvious corridors. Messages were carried by whispers, by notes slipped under plates, by codes scribbled on parchment that looked like homework. Dudley became useful in a new way. He was big. He was obvious. And most people didn't expect subtlety from him. That meant he could stand in corridors and look like he was just loitering. Just waiting for a friend, just being Dudley. He could take a detention with a shrug. He could be seen, without people assuming he mattered. Meanwhile, Hermione and the Ravenclaws became the brain of the resistance, weaving paths through rules like thread through needles. Ron and the Gryffindors became the fire, reckless and furious, ready to explode. And Harry became the center again, whether he wanted it or not. Dudley watched Harry change, not in some dramatic transformation, not in a way you could point to and label, in small things. Harry's smiles faded. His patience grew thinner. His eyes sharpened into something older. He stopped waiting for adults to help. He stopped expecting fairness. He stopped imagining that if you just explained the truth clearly enough, people would believe you. Dudley understood that change. He understood it because he'd lived with Vernon Dursley, and he knew what it was like to realize that authority wasn't always good. Sometimes, authority was just power with paperwork. One evening, Dudley found Harry in an empty classroom, with his head resting against the desk. It was after curfew. The corridors outside were quiet, but not safe quiet. It was the kind of quiet that belonged to people holding their breath. Dudley closed the door behind him softly. Harry didn't look up immediately. "You're going to get caught," Dudley said quietly. Harry let out a bitter sound that might have been a laugh. "Let them catch me," Harry muttered. Dudley's stomach tightened. That kind of resignation was dangerous. It was the kind of resignation that got you killed. Dudley walked closer and put his hand on the desk. "You're not allowed to give up," Dudley said. Harry finally lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. "Who's going to stop me?" Harry asked, voice flat. Dudley met his gaze. "I am," he said simply. Harry stared at him for a long moment. Then his jaw tightened, and he looked away, swallowing. Dudley's throat tightened too. Neither of them said, "I care." Neither of them said, "You matter." They didn't need to. Their whole existence together now was made of actions instead of speeches. Dudley took the seat opposite Harry without asking. "Show me your hand," Dudley said. Harry's shoulders tensed. "I'm fine," Harry snapped. Automatically, Dudley didn't move. He didn't argue. He just waited, stubborn as stone. Finally, Harry shoved his hand forward. The cuts had healed into pink scars now, but the words were still visible, etched into his skin like a curse. "I must not tell lies." Dudley stared. He felt a slow, vicious calm settle in him. "Do you know what the worst part is?" Dudley said quietly. Harry didn't answer. Dudley leaned forward, voice low. "The worst part is that I used to think this was normal," Dudley said. "Not this, not carving words into someone, but the idea that you deserved pain for existing." Harry's face tightened. Dudley swallowed hard. "I believed it," he continued, voice rough. "Because they taught me to. Because it was easy." Silence. Harry stared at his scarred hand, not meeting Dudley's eyes. You don't have to say sorry, Harry muttered. Dudley's chest tightened. I do, Dudley said. Not because it fixes anything, because it's true. Harry's throat moved as he swallowed. He didn't forgive Dudley in that moment, but he didn't push him away either. And for Harry Potter, who had survived by pushing everyone away before they could hurt him, that was a kind of mercy. Outside the classroom, footsteps passed in the corridor. They froze. Harry's wand slipped into his hand. Dudley's wand did too. The footsteps moved on. They exhaled slowly, eyes meeting for a second. A pact, wordless. We watch, we endure, we fight. The year tilted further after Christmas, not because the weather changed, because the world did. News filtered in through whispers and owl post, disappearances, arrests, ministry propaganda. The Daily Prophet printing lies so loudly that truth felt like a small voice drowned in noise. Dudley began to understand something he'd never understood as a child in Privet Drive. A society could be trained to hate. Not overnight, not with one speech, with 1,000 small permissions, with jokes that weren't funny, with whispers that became obedience. Dudley watched students accept Umbridge's rules because it made them feel safe. He watched others enforce them because power tasted good when you'd never had it. And he watched a few, quiet ones, scared ones, start resisting in ways that were almost invisible. A note passed hand to hand, a door left unlocked, a warning whispered before a patrol. Small rebellions, small courage. One afternoon, as Dudley sat in the Hufflepuff common room pretending to read, Ernie Macmillan sat down beside him. Ernie's posture was stiff, as always. His face was serious. Dursley, Ernie began. Dudley glanced up. Macmillan. Ernie frowned, like he didn't like the tone. This isn't the time, Ernie said sharply. Then he lowered his voice. You're making things worse. Dudley's eyes narrowed. Worse? Dudley repeated quietly. Ernie's cheeks flushed. You're associated with Potter, he said. You keep standing up for him. You keep involving yourself. People are watching, and it makes Hufflepuff look. Like what? Dudley asked, voice dangerously calm. Ernie hesitated, then forced it out. Like we're choosing sides, Ernie said. Dudley stared at him. A slow anger spread through his chest. You think there aren't sides? Dudley asked. Ernie stiffened. That's not what I meant. Dudley leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice low so no one else could hear. Ernie, Dudley said, they already chose for you. You just don't want to admit it. Ernie's jaw tightened. We have rules, Ernie hissed. We have order. We don't run around acting like Gryffindors. Dudley's mouth twitched. You're wearing a badge, Dudley said. Ernie blinked. He looked down at his robe, and Dudley saw it, a small ministry-approved pin, a symbol of compliance. Not Potter stinks, something else, something that said, I'm not a troublemaker, I'm on the safe side. Ernie's hand flew to it, as if he hadn't noticed it was visible. It's just, he began. Just a laugh, Dudley finished. Voice quiet. Ernie's face went red. Dudley sat back. That's what they said last year, Dudley said. When they wore Potter stinks. When they laughed. When they decided hurting someone was entertainment. Ernie looked away, throat moving. Dudley watched him, and for a second he saw something behind Ernie's stiffness. Fear. Not fear of danger. Fear of standing alone. Dudley understood that too, because Dudley had once been terrified of being anything other than what his parents wanted. He softened his voice slightly. You don't have to be brave like a Gryffindor, Dudley said. You just have to be loyal like a Hufflepuff. Ernie's eyes flicked back to him. Loyal to who? Ernie whispered, voice tight. Dudley, didn't hesitate. "To what's right," Dudley said, "even if it costs you." Ernie stared at him. Then he looked down at the badge again. Slowly, his fingers unclipped it and shoved it into his pocket. Dudley's chest loosened. Ernie didn't look relieved. He looked terrified. But he was doing it. He was choosing. That night, Ernie turned up in a corridor where Dudley was standing watch. He didn't speak at first. He just stood beside Dudley, shoulders tense, as if waiting for someone to notice and punish him. After a long moment, he said quietly, if he needs anything, Hufflepuff can help." Dudley looked at him. It was a simple sentence, but in that year, it was enormous. Dudley nodded once. "I'll tell him," he said, and he did. Harry didn't react dramatically when Dudley told him. Harry just stared at Dudley for a long moment, then looked away. But Dudley saw it in the way Harry exhaled, like the weight had shifted slightly, like maybe, just maybe, Harry didn't have to fight alone. The fight still came to them anyway. The night Harry received the vision, when his scar burned and his body went rigid with panic, Dudley wasn't there. Dudley was in the Hufflepuff common room, half asleep over a book, when a younger student shook him awake. "Dursley," the boy whispered urgently. "Potter's gone." Dudley's blood turned to ice. "What?" he hissed, standing too fast. The boy swallowed. He left with Weasley and Granger. They were whispering. They looked scared. Dudley's stomach dropped. Dudley didn't need details. Harry didn't leave in secret unless something was wrong. Very wrong. He ran. He ran through corridors like he was back in primary school, chasing someone down to hurt them. Except now, he was chasing to protect. He reached the Gryffindor common room entrance, but the fat lady wouldn't let him in. "You are not Gryffindor," she said primly, as if rules mattered more than crisis. "Harry's gone," Dudley snapped. "Let me in." The portrait sniffed. "I can't." Dudley swore under his breath and turned, mind racing. He needed information. He needed someone who could get him into places he couldn't access. He found Hermione's empty seat in the library later. He found Ron's absence confirmed by whispers in corridors. And he found Luna Lovegood drifting near a window, expression dreamy as always, as if the world wasn't on fire. Dudley stopped in front of her. "Lovegood," he said sharply. Luna blinked slowly at him. "Hello, Dudley," she said, as if greeting him in daylight at breakfast. "How do you know my name?" Dudley demanded. Luna's mouth twitched. "You're loud," she said simply. Dudley's jaw tightened. "Potter's gone," Dudley said. "Where did he go?" Luna tilted her head, as if listening to something only she could hear. "To the ministry," she said. Dudley's stomach dropped. "How do you—" "I heard," Luna said. "Voices. Worry. It's all quite loud if you pay attention." Dudley stared at her, then forced himself to breathe. "Do you know how to get there?" he asked. Luna's eyes drifted to his wand. "Yes," she said calmly. "But you'll need help. You can't just run into the ministry." Dudley's mind raced. "Who?" he asked. Luna blinked. "Me," she said, as if it was obvious. Dudley's chest tightened with frustration. You need someone," Luna said, cutting him off gently. "Someone who can go with you. Someone who isn't afraid of being strange." Dudley stared at her. He thought of the ministry's corridors, the cold courtroom, Umbridge's smile. He thought of Harry running into danger because he believed someone was being tortured. He thought of how often Harry had done that, thrown himself into the fire because no one else would. Dudley swallowed hard. "All right," he said. Fine, you. But we need more. Luna's gaze drifted past him. Neville, she said. And Ginny. They're brave. Dudley's fists clenched. He didn't have time for this, but he didn't have better options either. Within an hour, Dudley had gathered Neville Longbottom and Ginny Weasley, both of them pale and furious at the news that Harry had gone. Neville looked like something hard had settled in him in the past year, a kind of quiet steel. Ginny's eyes were sharp with anger. Ron and Hermione went too, Ginny said, voice tight. Idiots. Dudley didn't disagree. He just said, "We're bringing them back." They moved quickly. Too quickly. They took Thestrals, creatures Dudley couldn't fully see, only felt the strange pull of their presence, like invisible horses. Luna climbed on as if it was natural. Neville hesitated, but followed. Dudley's stomach churned, but he climbed too, gripping tight. The ride through the night sky felt unreal, wind tearing at robes, the castle shrinking behind them, the world opening beneath. Dudley's heart hammered the entire way, not from fear of heights, from fear of arriving too late. The ministry at night was worse. The atrium was empty. The greenish light made everything look sick. The golden statue gleamed with silent arrogance. They moved through corridors with wands out, breathing shallowly, footsteps echoing too loudly. Dudley's mind kept flashing back to the hearing. How small it had made him feel. Now he was walking into that same place as an intruder. He was walking into it for Harry. They found the battle in fragments. A crash of spells in a corridor. A shout. A flash of red light. They rounded a corner and saw Death Eaters. Real Death Eaters. Not bullies. Not teachers. Not ministry liars. Masked figures in black, moving like predators. Dudley's blood went cold. Ginny raised her wand instantly. Neville's face tightened. Luna looked oddly calm. Dudley stepped forward. His wand hand shook, but he forced it steady. "Expelliarmus!" Dudley shouted. The spell hit a Death Eater's wand and sent it spinning. Dudley didn't stop. He threw another spell, then another. His magic wasn't elegant, but it was forceful, driven by the same stubbornness that had lifted a feather and shoved Malfoy and stood in front of Dementors. A curse flashed toward him. Dudley ducked too late, and pain flared across his shoulder like fire. He grunted and kept moving. He wasn't here to win. He was here to get Harry out. They reached a chamber with a dais and a veil. Strange, whispering, wrong. Dudley's skin crawled. He saw Harry there, face pale, eyes wild, dueling masked figures like he was trying to fight the entire world alone. For a heartbeat, Dudley froze, because Harry looked like a child again, not the boy who lived, not the leader, just Harry, cornered, exhausted, refusing to fall. Dudley moved. He stepped between Harry and a curse aimed from the side. He raised his wand, shouted a shield charm, and felt the impact slam into the barrier like a battering ram. The shield held. Harry's head snapped toward him. "Dudley?" Harry gasped, shock punching through his focus. Dudley's mouth twisted. "Didn't I tell you?" Dudley muttered, breath heaving. "You're not allowed to give up." Harry's eyes flickered, and something fierce rose in them. Then they fought together, not side by side like strangers, like brothers. The battle blurred, spells, shouting, cold laughter from masked mouths. Dudley's shoulder burned. Neville went down at one point with a cry, then forced himself up again, face white with pain. Ginny's hair whipped around her face as she cast curses with furious precision. Luna moved like she'd always known where danger would strike. And then, auras, order members, chaos shifting as allies arrived. Dudley saw Sirius Black for the first time up close. wild-eyed, fierce, laughing in the face of danger like it was a game. He saw Harry's face when Sirius shouted his name. He saw, too late, the curse that struck. He saw Sirius fall through the veil, swallowed by it like he'd never existed. Harry's scream tore through the room. Dudley's blood turned to ice. He grabbed Harry's arm hard. "Harry!" he shouted. Harry fought him, wild and desperate, trying to run toward the veil. Dudley held on. Harry's grief was physical, violent. Dudley had never seen anything like it. "Let me go!" Harry screamed. Dudley's voice broke as he shouted back, "I'm not letting you die too." Harry froze for half a second at the words. Dudley didn't know why he'd said it like that. Too raw, too honest. But it was the truth. Harry's breath hitched. Then Dumbledore arrived like a storm. The duel between Dumbledore and Voldemort was something Dudley couldn't fully describe later. It was too big, too ancient. It made the Ministry's corridors feel small, like children's toys. Fire and water and light collided. Voldemort vanished, and the night ended with bodies and grief, and the sick knowledge that the war wasn't coming. It was here, back at Hogwarts. The summer after fifth year began with exhaustion and silence. The Ministry could no longer deny Voldemort's return. The lie had shattered in public. But the damage was done. People had believed the lie long enough to make truth feel suspicious. Harry carried Sirius's death like a weight that bent his spine. Dudley watched him, helpless in a way that made him furious. You could punch a bully. You could shield against a curse. You couldn't punch grief out of someone. The only thing you could do was stay. So Dudley stayed. He sat with Harry in the library when Harry stared at pages without reading. He walked beside him when corridors felt too crowded. He trained with him silently, late at night, when spells were the only language that didn't break under sorrow. And somewhere in those nights, in that quiet endurance, Dudley understood something that changed him again. Loyalty wasn't loud. It didn't always look like heroism. Sometimes it looked like being there when someone had nothing left but rage and emptiness, and refusing to leave them alone inside it. The year ended, but peace didn't come with summer, because the world outside Hogwarts was shifting fast. Dark marks appeared in the sky. People disappeared. The prophet printed fear, and the Order began to talk in quieter, heavier voices about plans, evacuations, protections, sacrifices. Dudley listened. He asked questions. He trained harder, and when he returned to that rented flat with Petunia and Harry, he found Petunia different too. Older in the face, eyes haunted. One night, Dudley found her sitting at the kitchen table, with a cup of tea gone cold. She looked up as he entered. "I'm afraid," she whispered. Dudley's throat tightened. "Of what?" he asked, though he already knew. Petunia's eyes flicked towards Harry's closed bedroom door. "Of losing him?" she said. Then her gaze shifted to Dudley. "And you," she added, voice breaking. "Of losing you." He didn't know how to respond to his mother's fear, not after years of her being the one who controlled everything, who decided who deserved kindness. Petunia swallowed hard. "I was wrong," she whispered. "About all of it." Dudley's chest tightened. He wanted to say, "It's too late." He wanted to say, "You can't undo what you did." But he looked at her hands, trembling, older, worn, and realized something. Petunia wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was admitting the truth. And sometimes, admission was the first act of repair. Dudley sat down across from her. He didn't take her hand. He wasn't ready. But he stayed at the table. And that, too, was a kind of choice. By sixth year, Hogwarts stopped pretending. The castle still held feasts, still lit candles, still assigned homework, still tried, in its ancient way, to keep childhood alive. But the world outside pressed against its walls like a tide. and every student felt it in the air. People disappeared. Names began to sound careful on tongues. Parents' letters came shorter, sharper, full of warnings and forced cheer. Some students didn't return after Christmas. Some returned and looked different, older in the eyes, quieter in the laughter. And then Dumbledore died. The news hit Dudley like a physical blow. Even though he hadn't known Dumbledore well enough to mourn him the way Harry did, Dudley mourned the idea of him. The last grown-up in the wizarding world who felt like he could stand in front of a storm and hold it back. Harry didn't cry. Harry went still. The silence in him became something edged and dangerous, as if grief had sharpened into a blade. Dudley watched him and knew, with the cold certainty of instinct, that Harry was leaving. He knew it the same way you know a punch is coming, by the shift in body language, by the way someone stops talking because the decision has already been made. They sat on the balcony of the flat in the summer, after sixth year, the air thick with heat and distant traffic, and Harry finally spoke. "I'm going," Harry said. Dudley didn't ask where. He didn't ask why. He knew. Dudley swallowed hard. "To hunt them," Dudley said quietly. Harry's eyes flicked to him. Horcruxes weren't common knowledge, but Harry had told Dudley enough, because Dudley had earned, slowly, the right to be told. Harry nodded once. Dudley's throat tightened. "I'm coming," Dudley said. Harry's head snapped toward him, sharp. "No," Harry said immediately. Dudley's jaw clenched. "Don't tell me no," Dudley said. "Not like you get to decide that on your own." Harry's eyes flared. "You don't understand what it is. It's not school. It's not sneaking around corridors. It's war." Dudley's mouth twisted. "I've been in war since I was 11, he snapped. Harry went still. Dudley breathed hard, trying to steady himself. "That sounded stupid," Dudley said, voice rough. "But you know what I mean. Everything in our lives has been danger. You don't get to walk into it alone." Harry stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. "You have, Mum," Harry said quietly. "You have a life you can still have. I'm not dragging you into the worst of it." Dudley's chest tightened. Harry still didn't understand. Harry still thought love was something that had to be earned by suffering alone. Dudley leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You're not dragging me," Dudley said. "I'm choosing." "You'll get killed," Harry muttered. Dudley's voice softened slightly, the truth slipping out before he could stop it. "So will you," Dudley said. "That's why you need someone who won't let you do something stupid." Harry's mouth twitched, faint and bitter. "Since when did you become the sensible one?" Harry asked. Dudley snorted. "Since someone had to," he said. Harry's eyes looked wet for a moment. Then he blinked it away and shook his head. "No," Harry said, firmer this time. "I can't bring you. It's not your destiny, Dudley." Dudley's temper flared. "Don't talk to me about destiny," Dudley said harshly. "Destiny is just an excuse people use when they're too scared to admit they're making choices." Harry flinched at that. Dudley's voice dropped, rough. "You made a choice when you kept helping me in the library," Dudley said. "You made a choice when you didn't give up on me. Let me make one now." Harry's gaze locked on him, something raw moving behind his eyes. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Harry exhaled, slow and shaking. "I need you alive," Harry whispered. Dudley's throat closed. "I'm trying," Dudley said, voice breaking slightly. Harry swallowed hard. Then, finally, he nodded once. "All right," Harry said. Dudley's chest loosened, relief so sharp it almost hurt. But the relief didn't last, because the world didn't give them time to plan together. The ministry fell. It happened like a door slamming. One week you heard rumors. The next week you heard confirmations. The next week, The world was different. Muggle-borns hunted, teachers threatened, new laws written like chains. The Daily Prophet's lies turned into official truth, and Hogwarts became a prison dressed up as a school. Harry didn't get to leave in peace. He vanished. Not because he wanted to abandon Dudley, but because there were eyes everywhere, and Harry Potter's face had become the most wanted thing in Britain. Dudley woke up one morning in the flat to find Harry's bed empty. No note, no goodbye, just absence. Dudley stood there staring at the empty room, heart pounding, anger and fear twisting together until he felt sick. Petunia hovered in the doorway, pale. "He had to," she whispered. Dudley turned on her, rage flaring, then stopped. Petunia wasn't his enemy anymore. Not fully, not in the way Vernon had been. Petunia was just broken in a different way. Dudley swallowed hard. "I know," he said. "I know he had to." But knowing didn't make it easier. Dudley returned to Hogwarts for 7th year with something hard inside him. Not despair, not resignation. Hogwarts wasn't safe anymore. And Dudley had learned, in the worst possible way, that safety was often an illusion anyway. The new headmaster was Snape. Seeing Snape sit in Dumbledore's chair made Dudley's stomach twist. Students whispered. Some feared Snape. Some hated him. Some clung to the idea that if Snape was in charge, at least it wasn't a Death Eater. But the Carrows arrived too, and they didn't pretend to be teachers. They taught cruelty like a subject. They taught pain like it was discipline. They turned detention into torture and called it education. Dudley watched it happen. He watched students flinch when footsteps echoed. He watched first years try to hold tears back with trembling lips. He watched the castle change again, becoming quieter, darker, more suspicious. And Dudley understood that his job now was not to chase Harry. His job was to hold the line. Because Harry had gone to fight the war out there, Dudley could fight the war inside the walls. It started small. A Hufflepuff first year crying quietly in the common room because someone had called her blood traitor and threatened her family. Dudley sat beside her and said nothing at first. Then he simply said, "You're safe here." The words felt strange because Dudley had never been the person who made someone safe. He had been the person someone needed protection from. But now he was something else. He began noticing the vulnerable ones. Muggle-borns who stopped speaking in class, half-bloods who kept their heads down, kids who had the wrong kind of parent, the wrong kind of surname. Dudley started using the castle the way he'd learned to use it in the DA days. Like a maze, like a weapon. He found forgotten passages. He remembered secret doors. He learned which portraits were willing to keep quiet and which would sell you out for flattery. He began moving people from place to place. A warning here, a hiding spot there. A stolen loaf from the kitchens. A blanket, a spare potion ingredient. Small things. But small things were how you kept people alive when the world wanted them dead. The Hufflepuff Common Room became a sanctuary. Not an official one, a quiet one. They didn't name it. Naming made it something that could be targeted. But Hufflepuff, when it decided to be loyal, was terrifyingly good at it. Ernie Macmillan became the organizer. Hannah Abbott became the heart. Susan Bones became the eyes and ears, gathering whispers from corridors and bringing them back like contraband. Dudley became the wall. The physical barrier you couldn't move easily. The presence that made bullies hesitate. The person who stood in front of a first year and made the world stop. "You get yourself killed," Ernie warned him one night, voice shaking. Dudley shrugged, sitting on the edge of a bed in a hidden room, bruises blooming on his arm. "Better me than them," Dudley said simply. Ernie stared at him. "You really mean that?" Ernie whispered. Dudley looked away, I used to be the reason they were scared, Dudley said quietly. I can't. I can't live like that anymore. He didn't say Harry's name. He didn't need to. They all knew who had changed him. The Carrows noticed Dudley eventually. Of course they did. Cruelty always noticed resistance. It started with detentions. Dudley was hauled into classrooms after hours and forced to stand while Amicus Carrow sneered at him, wand tapping his palm like a threat. You're a funny one, Dursley, Carrow said once, voice oily. Half your family's muggle, half your family's famous, and you're here playing hero. Dudley said nothing. Carrow smiled wider. You know, Carrow continued, there are spells that make people talk, spells that make people scream, spells that make them beg. Dudley met his eyes, calm and stubborn. Do it, Dudley said. Carrow's smile faltered. Because Carrow wanted fear, and Dudley had learned, truly learned, that fear was something you could survive if you refused to feed it. Carrow struck him with a curse that made Dudley's muscles lock and his nerves burn. Dudley gritted his teeth. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. When it ended, he sagged slightly, sweat on his forehead, but he stayed standing. Carrow stared at him with irritation. You're going to break, Carrow said. Dudley breathed hard, then said quietly, no. After that, detentions became worse, and Dudley's resolve became firmer, because every time Dudley endured, it sent a message to the younger students. You can survive this. You can keep your spine. You can refuse to become what they want. That was the real resistance. Not the spells, not the hiding spots. The refusal. The winter of 7th year was the coldest Dudley had ever felt, and not because of weather. It was the cold of a place losing hope. It was the cold of whispers about Voldemort winning. It was the cold of parents no longer sending letters. It was the cold of knowing that if Harry failed, everything failed. Dudley lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where Harry was, wondering if he was alive, wondering if he was hungry, wondering if he was alone. Dudley kept going anyway, because there was no alternative. Then, one night, the room of requirement opened again. It didn't open for Dudley at first. It opened for a Ravenclaw girl, frantic, whispering that Potter was back, that Potter had returned. The words spread like fire. Potter's back. Harry Potter is in Hogwarts. Dudley's heart slammed against his ribs. For a second, the world went dizzy. Then Dudley was moving. He ran through corridors, ignoring curfew, ignoring patrols, ignoring the possibility of being caught, because some instincts were older than rules. He reached the room of requirement and saw it. Faces packed inside, students huddled in secret, candles flickering, food on tables, blankets on the floor. And there, standing in the center, like a storm contained in human skin, was Harry. Harry looked different, thinner, sharper, older in the eyes, but alive. Dudley stopped a few feet away, breathing hard. Harry turned. For a second, Harry's gaze locked on Dudley and something in his face cracked. Relief, grief, something too big for words. Dudley crossed the space and grabbed Harry by the shoulders. You idiot, Dudley whispered, voice breaking. You absolute idiot. Harry let out a shaky breath that might have been a laugh. Missed you too, Harry muttered. Dudley pulled him into a fierce hug. Harry stiffened for a second. Then, slowly, he held on too. Around them, students watched with wide eyes. They didn't understand the history. They didn't understand how impossible this moment was. But they understood what it meant. The boy who lived had someone who wouldn't let him be alone. Harry pulled back, eyes bright. Dudley, he said quietly. Dudley nodded once, swallowing hard. Yeah, Dudley said. Yeah, I'm here. Harry's gaze flicked around the room, taking in the hidden sanctuary. "You did this," Harry said softly. Dudley shook his head. "We did," he said. "Hufflepuff. Everyone—" Harry's throat moved as he swallowed. For a moment, Dudley saw gratitude on his face so raw it hurt. Then Harry's expression hardened again, because Harry didn't get to linger in softness. "We have to finish it," Harry said. Dudley nodded. "I know," he said. "The Battle of Hogwarts began the way storms begin, with a pressure change you feel in your bones. Voldemort's voice rolled over the castle grounds like thunder, promising mercy if they surrendered, Harry. The great hall filled with students and teachers and fear, the air heavy with the knowledge that any choice could mean death. Dudley stood near the front, close to Harry. He didn't look at the faces behind him. He didn't want to see the terror in first year's eyes, because it would make him angry enough to do something reckless. Voldemort's voice echoed again. "Give me Harry Potter," it said, smooth and cold, "and none shall be harmed." Silence. Then a voice cut through it. "Pansy Parkinson, what are you waiting for?" she shrieked. "Someone grab him." The words rang out like betrayal, and Dudley moved. He stepped directly in front of Harry, arms spreading slightly, wand raised. "No," Dudley said. His voice was steady. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. For a heartbeat, the great hall froze. Then Hufflepuff rose, not in a roar, in a quiet collective movement. Students pushing back benches, standing shoulder to shoulder, faces pale but determined. Then Gryffindor rose. Then Ravenclaw. A wave of bodies, a tide of refusal. McGonagall's voice cut through the room, sharp and commanding. "Slytherin will leave first," she snapped. "Then anyone else who wishes to depart. The rest of us—" Her eyes swept the hall. "We fight." And they did. Chaos erupted. Stone exploded. Glass shattered. Spells screamed through the air like lightning. The castle shook. Dudley fought the way he always fought, not elegantly, not with flourish, but with stubborn force. He shielded first years. He stunned Death Eaters who got too close. He disarmed attackers who underestimated him. He moved like a wall through corridors, pushing forward, refusing to fall back. And when magic faltered, when his wand arm shook with exhaustion, his fists did what they'd always done. A Death Eater learned that the hard way when Dudley's punch connected with his jaw and sent him crashing into a fallen suit of armor. Seamus Finnegan, battered and bleeding nearby, saw it and let out a startled laugh. "Bloody hell, Dursley." Dudley didn't laugh back, because the battle wasn't funny. It was desperate. It was the kind of fight where every breath felt stolen. At some point, Dudley lost track of time. The world narrowed to corridors and stone and the sound of spells. He saw Ernie dragging an injured student to safety. He saw Hannah Abbott throwing a shield charm with trembling hands. He saw Neville Longbottom's face streaked with dirt and blood, eyes blazing. He saw Harry vanish into the chaos again and again, always pulled toward the center of danger like gravity. Dudley followed, not because Harry needed protecting like a child, because Harry needed someone to watch his back, because Harry had never had that. Then it happened, the moment that split Dudley's life into before and after. Even though Dudley would live through it, it happened in the great hall again, after hours of fighting, after bodies had fallen, after the air had thickened with smoke and grief. Dudley saw Harry across the hall, moving towards Voldemort's circle, face set with fierce calm. A Death Eater on the side raised his wand. Dudley saw the angle, saw the intent, saw the green flash gathering. Time slowed the way it does when instinct takes over. Dudley didn't think. He moved. He crossed the space in 2 long strides, shoulder slamming into Harry's chest, shoving him sideways. The killing curse shot past where Harry's heart had been and hit Dudley instead. For a split second, Dudley felt nothing. Then he felt everything at once. A cold, searing impact, like being struck by pure absence, like the world trying to erase him. His legs went out from under him. Stone rushed up. He hit the floor hard. The sound around him dulled as if the battle had moved far away. Dudley stared up at the ceiling, blinking slowly. The enchanted roof flickered above, broken and smoky. Harry's face appeared above him, twisted in horror. "No," Harry said. The word cracked like something inside him had snapped. Harry dropped to his knees, hands grabbing Dudley's robes, shaking him as if he could force the world to undo itself. "No, no, no," Harry whispered. Dudley tried to speak. His mouth didn't work at first. His chest felt heavy, like it was filled with wet sand. Harry's eyes were shining, wild with panic, and in them Dudley saw something that made his throat tighten even as he struggled to breathe. Harry loved him, not politely. "You don't get to leave me now," Harry whispered, voice breaking. Dudley heard the words through a haze and felt something stubborn flare inside him. Not death. Not surrender. Stubbornness. Dudley's lips moved. A sound came out, thin and rough. "Oi!" Dudley rasped. Harry froze, eyes wide. Dudley blinked slowly, forcing air into his lungs. "Told you," Dudley whispered. Harry's breath hitched. Dudley's mouth twitched, barely. "Hufflepuffs," Dudley rasped, "are stubborn." He pressed his forehead to Dudley's shoulder, shaking. Around them, the battle still raged, but for a moment, the world narrowed again. Two boys from Privet Drive in the center of a war. Then Harry rose. Slowly, his wand trembled in his hand, not from fear, from fury. Dudley's blood stained his robes. His brother's sacrifice burned in his chest like a brand. Voldemort stood across the hall, smiling that lipless, terrible smile. "Sentiment," Voldemort whispered, "always your weakness." Harry's voice was quiet when he answered. "No," Harry said, "it's my strength." The duel that followed shook the castle. Elder wand against Holly, green light against red. The hall held its breath. And when Voldemort's curse rebounded, when the dark magic snapped back on itself like a whip, Voldemort fell. Silence crashed down. Not peace, not relief. Silence, like the world had stopped moving to check if it was allowed to continue. Harry didn't celebrate. He ran back to Dudley. Dudley's vision was blurry. He could feel hands lifting him, voices shouting for healers, the sting of potions, but he was alive, barely, stubbornly. The great hall became a hospital. Healers rushed between the wounded. Survivors clung to each other like shipwrecked people clinging to driftwood. Madame Pomfrey worked on Dudley for hours, her face fierce, her hands steady. "The curse carved deep," she muttered. But it didn't take him. Harry sat nearby the whole time, refusing to move. When Petunia arrived, escorted by Order members, she looked like she had been hollowed out. She saw Dudley first, alive, bandaged, breathing, and collapsed at his side with a broken sound, clutching him like she'd never let go. Then she turned to Harry. The years of cruelty hung between them. Cupboards, locked doors, missed meals, jealousy and fear. Petunia's hand trembled as she reached out. Harry looked at her, without softness, without hatred, just truth. "Thank you," Petunia whispered, voice breaking, "for saving him, for saving us." Harry didn't say "you're welcome." That would have been a lie. Instead, he said quietly, "He saved me first." The sunrise over Hogwarts was pale and gentle. as if the sky was trying to be kind after everything the earth had endured. Dudley drifted in and out of sleep. Each time he woke, Harry was there, sometimes silent, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, sometimes holding a cup of water, sometimes staring at Dudley like he needed the proof of his breathing to convince himself the world wasn't cruel enough to take everything. Days passed. Dudley healed. Slowly, stubbornly. The war ended, but the aftermath began. Funerals, rebuilding, grief, quiet conversations about what came next. Dudley stayed at Hogwarts longer than most, not because he loved the castle, because it had become the place where he had finally become someone he could live with. When the time came to leave, Harry walked beside him. They stood outside the castle gates, looking out at the rolling green hills, the world quiet for the first time in years. "You didn't have to do it," Harry said, voice rough. Dudley's mouth twitched. "Yes," Dudley said, "I did." Harry swallowed hard. Then he did something Dudley didn't expect. He held his hand out. Not for a handshake, not formal, just there. Dudley stared, then slowly took it. Harry's grip was solid, warm, real, a promise. Years later, King's Cross Station, the Hogwarts Express gleamed scarlet on the platform. Children rushed past with trunks and owls. Parents waved. Harry stood with his children, James, Lily, Albus, voices soft and affectionate. Beside him stood Dudley, older now, broader, a little more weathered, with a daughter clutching his hand. Dudley's daughter looked at the platform with wide eyes, nervous in the same way Dudley had once been. "Nervous?" Harry asked quietly. Dudley let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. "Terrified," he admitted. Harry's mouth twitched. "Just like first year," Harry said. Dudley nodded, eyes on his daughter. "It's strange," he murmured. "I used to think this world was wrong. And now?" Harry asked. Dudley looked at the train, the students, the magic in the air that no longer felt like an accusation. "Now, I think it was always there," Dudley said quietly. "I just didn't know how to live next to it." The whistle blew. The children boarded. The train pulled away. The platform slowly emptied. Harry watched the scarlet tail vanish and felt that familiar ache of letting go. Then Dudley clapped his shoulder. Solid, warm, present. "Same time next year, brother," Dudley said. Harry smiled. "Same time next year," Harry replied. They walked off the platform together. Two boys from Privet Drive. One cupboard, one second bedroom. A lifetime of pain between them. But pain wasn't the end of their story. People loved to say, blood protected. Ancient magic, sacrificial bonds, the stuff of legend. But Dudley knew the truth. It wasn't Petunia's blood that saved Harry Potter. It wasn't fate. It wasn't prophecy. It was choice. Dudley's choice. A boy taught to hate, who learned to love. A brother who refused to let go. Some magic can't be taught at Hogwarts. Can't be waved into existence. Can't be written down in spell books. Some magic can only be chosen. And that was where this timeline ended. Not in smoke and blood, though it began there, but in something quieter. Two men walking side by side, no longer trapped by what they were taught, no longer defined by a man who tried to burn two letters, just two brothers, still stubborn, still scarred, still standing, because hate isn't born in blood. It's taught, and if it can be taught, it can be unlearned. One choice at a time.